So, looking at the activity feed, I just realized that Sirkar came in here yesterday, rated us, and I said that we were going to be doing this, right? Like I said that that's what the title was, and that's what we would be doing. And then I think immediately when he came in, that's exactly when we split and started working on something completely different. So, we're going to continue with this. I want to read through it all. This is our last stream until the 29th. I do say taking recommendations, but I'm going to try to just get through this stuff and see if we make it. See if no one notices. If we finish up, then we'll start watching stuff. I'll figure out something to watch, something fun. Maybe that Chris Williamson video where he goes over his biggest takeaways of the year, something like that. I think that might be cool. Might be useful. So let's just kind of start the philosophical cartography, reason versus sentiment. Which I should start. I shouldn't oil up. Oh yeah, now we're ready. To understand the modern scientific findings on moral psychology, one must first ground the discussion in the philosophical traditions that framed the hypotheses now being tested in fMRI scanners and psychology labs. The debate centers on the source of moral authority. Does it stem from the logical structure of agency, whatever that means, or from the contingencies of human empathy and passion? The rationalist inheritance. Moral rationalism asserts that that moral truths are knowable through reason alone, and that moral requirements are requirements of rationality. This tradition, finding its apogee. Oh, that's just great. Okay. Define.
Apogee.
Apogee, nice. In the works of Immanuel Kant, posits that to act immorally is to act irrationally. Okay. Kantian constructivism and the categorical imperative. Here we go. Favorite stuff here. Kant represented the pinnacle of the rationalist argument. He contended that moral truths are Actually, I don't even know if we should read all this stuff. Who cares? Who cares? We know Kant. We're not about this stuff. Except Kant's kind of goated for what he did, so. Contractualism and reasonable rejection. Thomas Scanlon's contractualism represents a modern rationalist framework that further distances morality from simple physiological effects, or physiological affect. In What We Owe to Each Other, Scanlon argues that moral wrongness is determined by principles that no one could reasonably reject. This relies on the cognitive capacity to assess reasons and justifications rather than the presence of specific emotional states. All right. The sentimentalist challenge. In opposition stands the sentimentalist tradition championed by Hume, Adam Smith, and contemporary philosophers like D'Armes and Jacobson. Hume famously declared that reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions, arguing that reason alone is inert and cannot motivate action. The anti-rationalist practicality argument, core argument, is the anti-rationalist practicality argument, which proceeds as follows. Moral judgments are intrinsically motivating. If you judge X is wrong, you are motivated to avoid X. Reason alone deals with truth and falsehood, epistemology, or means ends calculations. It does not generate intrinsic motivation. Therefore, moral judgments cannot be derived solely from reason. They must involve sentiment or passion. This is kind of crazy. I think this is an effective argument, and it comes out prior to what we know about the brain and affect in general. This argument suggests that without the body, without the physiological arousal of desire, aversion, or sympathy, moral judgment would be a dry academic exercise with no pull on our behavior. So then we got rational sentimentalism. Recent scholarship has attempted to refine this view into rational sentimentalism. They argue that values such as the funny, the disgusting, the shameful are sentiment dependent However, they introduce a normative dimension. These emotions can be fitting or unfitting. To judge something as shameful is to judge that shame is the appropriate response to it. This theory bridges the gap, acknowledging that while morality is rooted in emotional response, there are standards of rationality, fittingness, that apply to those emotions. For example, it might be okay, so this is something that we attacked yesterday, given that you don't know if you've been calibrated to think that what is good is what you feel is good. There's still that ambiguity as to, if people understand the world in different ways, and if people understand the world in different ways and they have subjective opinions about what is good, then when each of them just feels the same, like these emotions towards what they feel is good. And so that's the downfall here. You'd have to assume that everyone has some access to the truth, and people are just like not smart enough to see it, or they know it, but then they like act out in a different, I don't know. It would be a very difficult thing to hold. All right, the synthesis, the necessary friction. The friction between these two schools has generated the central questions for modern moral psychology. If the rationalists are right, we should expect moral judgment to correlate with activity in the brain's executive control networks. For example, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. If the sentimentalists are right, moral judgment should depend on the limbic system and emotional processing centers. For example, the amygdala and ventromedial prefrontal cortex. As the following section will detail, the biological evidence suggests that humans are Humean by default, reliant on embodied sentiment, but possess Kantian overrides that can be engaged under specific resource-intensive conditions. Okay. The evolutionary origins of the moral instinct. To determine how rational morality is, so how rational it is, we must examine its function. Why do we have it? Evolutionary psychology suggests that the physiological and emotional mechanisms underpinning morality were selected not for their truth-tracking ability, epistemic rationality, but for their ability to foster social cohesion and cooperation. Instrumental rationality in the evolutionary sense. Reciprocal altruism and social glue. Robert Trivers' theory of reciprocal altruism explains how moral behaviors could evolve in a self-interested world. In his seminal work, Trivers argued that emotions such as guilt, gratitude, and moralistic aggression evolved as adaptation mechanisms to regulate the system of altruism. Gratitude ensures we repay debts, maintain cooperative relationships. Guilt motivates a reparation when we cheat, preventing the dissolution of valuable alliances. Moralistic aggression, anger, punishes cheaters, enforcing the stability of the group. Okay, these emotions act as commitment devices, binding individuals to cooperative strategies even when immediate rational self-interest, for example, stealing resources without being caught, might dictate otherwise. Thus, the irrationality of sticking to moral principles, even when it costs us personally, is, from an evolutionary perspective, a long-term rational strategy for genetic success. The function of moral emotions. Moral emotions are not merely byproducts, they are the engine of moral conduct. Research distinguishes between other condemning emotions, anger, disgust, contempt, and self-conscious emotions, shame, guilt, embarrassment. Right. The distinction between guilt and shame is particularly illustrative of the body's role. Guilt focuses on the action. I did a bad thing. I just did a bad thing. Do we have to... Oh no, is this not even it? Oh yeah. Okay. Got the harp going. And motivates fixing it. Shame focuses on the self, I am bad, and motivates hiding. This differentiation suggests distinct neural and physiological pathways for regulating social behavior. Okay, evolutionary mismatch. When instincts fail. Critical insight for the user's query regarding rationality is the concept of evolutionary mismatch. Our moral instincts evolved in the Pleistocene environment small, tight-knit hunter-gatherer groups. In the modern world, these instincts can misfire, leading to judgments that are biologically rational, adaptive for genes, but ethically irrational, inconsistent with modern values, right? For example, xenophobia, fear of strangers, was adaptive for protecting the tribe from potential aggressors or pathogens, but it manifests as racism or xenophobia in modern diverse societies. So I think this is where I should look up emotion. Oh, bummer. I think we are lost. Maybe we're not. Maybe we're not. Can we find there we go. I think that this book, The Perpetrator Discussed, I think it's going to talk about this, the moral limits of gut feelings. It's going to point out that even our gut feelings aren't necessarily going to point us in what we would describe as, moral behavior. But that's the point. It's the what we would describe as moral behavior changes as the mechanisms stay the same. Similarly, the instinct to feel empathy is heavily based toward identifiable victims and members of our in-group, making us irrationally insensitive to large-scale statistical suffering, for example, climate change or genocides in distant lands. Right, as Sam Harris has pointed out, we care much more about the one suffering girl across the world than we do hundreds of thousands of people, somewhere else that perhaps it would be, I don't know, like, if you have your little bit of charity money, do you give it towards helping the girl versus, the 100,000? I guess that's not a great example because, with a small amount of money, you'd probably only help, a few amount of people anyway. And giving it to one is probably not that big of a deal. He just points out that one is so much more salient for you. For us, it's human. This mismatch implies that relying solely on body/emotion morality is often irrational in the context of global ethics, as our biological hardware is not calibrated for the scale of modern moral problems. All right, the social intuitionist model, the emotional dog. The most significant psychological challenge to the rationalist view comes from Jonathan Haidt's social intuitionist model. Haidt proposed, so interestingly, Haidt was front and center in the chapter we read in the Embodied Cognition Handbook. Haidt proposes that moral judgment is caused by quick automatic intuitions, the emotional dog, so we all have that dog in us, while moral reasoning is a post hoc process, the rational tail, used primarily for social justification rather than truth seeking. Intuition first, reasoning second. The SIM posits that when we encounter a moral situation, we have an immediate flash of affect, a gut feeling of like or dislike. And I don't think he comes up with this. I think this is all kind of built on the somatic marker hypothesis. This intuition is the judgment. Reasoning comes later, only if we are challenged to explain ourselves. Intuitive judgment, post hoc reasoning, reason, persuasion. This model flips the traditional view on its head. We do not reason to find the truth. We intuit the truth and use reason to defend it. This explains why moral arguments are so often futile. Unless you can change the person's intuition, their emotional state, their reasoning will simply construct a new defense for their existing view. So this is a huge deal. This we see all the time today. Yeah. Moral dumbfounding, the smoking gun. The strongest evidence for the primacy of emotion over reasoning, or over reason, is the phenomenon of moral dumbfounding. In classic experiments, Haidt and colleagues presented subjects with scenarios that were harmless but taboo. Okay, so this it did cover as well. The incest scenario, how it has this visceral reaction, but then people were unable to actually explain why it was immoral. The cannibal scenario, a woman is cleaning out her closet and she finds her old family flag. She doesn't want it anymore, so she cuts it up into pieces and uses the rags to clean her bathroom. Okay, that's a scenario. Or a family dog A family's dog was killed by a car in front of their house. They had heard that dog meat was delicious, so they cut up the dog's body and cooked it and ate it for dinner. Jeez, is that even cannibalism? It's just you're eating a dog. Subjects consistently judged these actions as wrong. When asked why, they would offer reasons. When the experimenter pointed out that the scenario explicitly ruled these risks out, birth control was used or they remained close. Subjects did not change their judgment. Instead, they entered a state of dumbfounding. I don't know. I can't explain it. I just know it's wrong. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I guess this just points out that someone can have a moral judgment without rational reasons, right? That's all this points out. This doesn't like point out that, you know, rationality is you know, it suggests that there might be more to more to morality than the reasons. You could say that it's still a rational thought even though you don't have the reasons for it. But then you have to figure out what rational means here. And I would point out that rational might be most closely tied to the feeling of it is rational than some externally judged rational because of reasons. It's more so like rational because of conclusion, and anyone gets to, you know, infer whether the conclusion is apt. Okay, this phenomenon demonstrates that judgment is driven by an emotional response, likely disgust, and the reasoning is merely a fabrication attempting to support the feeling. When the reasons fail, the feeling and the judgment remains. The body, disgust reaction, has already decided, and the mind is left scrambling to catch up. Critiques of SIM, the role of prior reasoning. While SIM has been influential, it is not without detractors. Bizarro and Bloom argue that Haidt underestimates the role of private reasoning. They suggest that while specific judgments may be intuitive, these intuitions are often shaped by prior reasoning and cultural learning. Aha. So it would be prior reasoning that led to this feeling that you have in the moment without the reasons manifesting. So once again, we kind of come down to a semantic issue of what it would mean for your thoughts to be rational. If they're affected by the affective parts of your brain and body, the affective mechanisms, but they were internalized via actually rational thinking, then how do you judge what is actually rational thinking? It's a difficult question. For example, a person may intuitively reject racism today, not because of an innate biological module, but because they have previously reasoned or been taught via reasoning about equality, and this reasoning has settled into an automatic intuition. Okay, they reject it not because of the innate module, but because they have previously reasoned. Okay, furthermore, individuals with high need for cognition are more likely to engage in genuine deliberation that can override intuition. Studies show that when people are given time and encouragement to think, they can sometimes reverse their intuitive judgments, moving from a disgust-based condemnation to a harm-based permission. Right? Recent studies also suggest that dumbfounding might not be purely irrational. Subjects may be responding to probabilistic risks. For example, the high probability that incest usually does lead to harm, rather than the specific artificial certainty of the experimental vignette. The rationalist response argues that subjects are acting as Bayesian updaters, refusing to accept the zero risk premise because it violates their prior world knowledge. Okay. The neuroscience of moral judgment, the brain and the body. If morality depends on the body and emotions, there must be identifiable neural substrates that process these signals. Neuroscience has provided overwhelming evidence that moral judgment relies heavily on the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and the integration of somatic states. So this is actually following a very similar path to the discussion that was in that chapter. Maybe they had their hands on Gemini before we did. Here we go, the somatic marker hypothesis. Antonio Damasio comes up with the somatic marker hypothesis, provides the neurobiological mechanism for Haidt's intuitionism. Damasio argues that decision-making is guided by somatic markers, bodily states, for example, heart rate changes, gut tightening, sweating, associated with past emotional experiences. When we consider a moral transgression, the brain triggers a somatic state. Yo, Onion Hummer, what's good? Meister Stan, the Meister Man. Hell yeah. Unfortunately, we were just kind of reading through this stuff once again. I'm trying to get through this Gemini one because we actually kind of just stopped yesterday and went into that whole side thing, which we still have to read the end of. But I wanted to just quickly get through this. And weirdly enough, this is following like the same outline almost as that Routledge handbook of embodied cognition. So it seems like this is where people are at. Even though the stuff is kind of it feels magical and fake in some cases. So the somatic marker hypothesis, we've been talking about this all the time. I'm a big Damasio fan now. So when we consider a moral transgression, the brain triggers a somatic state, a gut check that signals danger or aversion. The signal is processed in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Without this somatic input, rational decision-making collapses because the agent cannot assign value to the different options. Phineas Gage. Oh, man. Classic. Absolutely goated for getting brain damage. And the ventromedial prefrontal cortex lesions. So right back to our consciousness video, how important lesions are at telling us what things are doing in the brain. The classic case of Phineas Gage, who suffered damage to his ventromedial, I'm saying that right, ventromedial? Is that what we've been saying? Yeah. Prefrontal cortex illustrates this. Gage retained his intellect and theoretical reasoning abilities, but lost his moral compass. He became impulsive, profane, and unable to make advantageous decisions. So, yeah, if we lose a key part of our brain that deals with emotions, we become irrational and immoral. But when I give myself brain damage, no one cares. Shame. True, you just had to have done it first, Gage is actually the first person to ever suffer brain damage in the entirety of human history. Modern studies on patients with VMPFC damage show a specific pattern of moral judgment. They become hyper-rational or cold utilitarians. Yikes. In the footbridge version of the trolley problem, where one might push a large man off a bridge to stop a trolley, healthy people have a strong negative emotional reaction and refuse to push. But these patients, lacking this somatic alarm, see only the math, 1 death versus 5 deaths, and readily agree to push the man. This suggests that what we often call moral conscience is actually a somatic emotional break. Without it, we become ruthlessly rational in a way that most humans find abhorrent. The rationality of the ventromedial prefrontal cortex patient is a defective rationality because it fails to integrate social and emotional values essential for human survival. All right. Psychopathy and the failure of embodiment. Psychopathy offers a dark mirror to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex damage. Psychopaths often understand social rules, theoretical rationality, but do not feel them. Research indicates that psychopaths show reduced autonomic reactivity, for example, skin conductance responses or SCR, when imagining harm to others. They lack the somatic markers that usually inhibit antisocial behavior. In studies using the Iowa gambling task, healthy participants generate anticipatory skin conductance responses, sweaty palms, before making a risky choice, often before they consciously realize the choice is bad. Psychopaths and ventromedial prefrontal cortex patients do not generate this signal. This lack of physiological fear or aversion allows them to commit moral transgressions without the internal punishment of guilt or anxiety. Implication: moral rationality without moral emotionality results in monstrosity. The body is not an impediment to morality, it is its anchor. So this is actually something that the Routledge Handbook of Embodied Cognition did not include. It did not talk about psychopathy, I don't think. But that's also a great example here. Using the trolley problem to test brain damage is insane. They couldn't find something more concrete. Yeah, I know. I do think, or I do agree. It's very odd to use the trolley problem. Granted, when they say they used the trolley problem, I think they used it like when the trolley problem was like introduced, or when it was first, hitting the philosophical landscape. It's not like our understanding of the trolley problem where we already know it's a meme, we know it's been beat to death. So yeah, I thought it was old. Yeah, I don't actually, you know what, that's a good question. Let's we should do a deep research on this. But how old is the trolley problem for moral philosophy? Yeah, I could be totally wrong about that intuition, and yeah, I would probably want the experiments to be something so much more compelling. Like as I mentioned, the idea of the pushing someone off. Like you could have reservations for so many reasons. That said, the loss of the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or the psychopaths, like the fact that they have such a different response to it is more compelling evidence. Because in theory, if you just had another reason why you wouldn't push the man into the track, and it wasn't just an emotional cue, then in theory that would show up in your rational thought. And they should still be able to have that type of response to it. However, that isn't the case. So Phineas Gage walks into a room. Philosopher: wow, look at this guy missing half his head. I know what I'll ask him to see if he has brain damage. The trolley problem. Well, okay, they didn't ask Phineas Gage that. They saw that Phineas Gage became pretty impulsive and stuff, and so they're drawing that comparison. Okay, so it's pretty old. It's 1967. Wow, the problem of abortion. This thing came up in the discussion of abortion, specifically to explore why it might be permissible to steer a driverless tram away from 5 men toward 1, but not permissible to kill a healthy patient to harvest their organs. Okay. Naming and expansion, 1976. Aha, this is when the Fat Man comes into the play. Introduce the famous Fat Man variation. You are a driver, choosing which track to take. Okay. This edition shifted the debate from double effect to a clash between utilitarianism and deontology. So I think this was kind of, the origin of the Fat Man version, though, was a similar type of test. It was still a test of like, hey, are you actually utilitarian or are you deontological? Like if you have a visceral reaction to doing something that you know to be wrong, or more viscerally wrong, like pushing someone into it, like now this is technically killing someone, like more immediately, then maybe you are more deontological than you think. Even if you think you're utilitarian, you should have the same response to both of those scenarios, or people should, and that wouldn't be the case. The proto-trolleys. Oh, while Foots gets credit for the trolley, specifically the structure of the dilemma is older. We got Sharp posed a similar question to undergraduates involving a railroad switchman. Okay, I think that should count. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we're giving this to Sharp here. That's easy. All right. Asking the trolley problem means the questioner has brain damage. True. Wasn't Phineas Gage's brain damage exaggerated by researchers? I don't know. Is that true? Was it that the brain damage was exaggerated, or was it that his response was exaggerated? Because if the brain damage was exaggerated, then that almost would be more compelling evidence that you don't need to lose that much of the brain. But it depends what they exaggerated. If it was still that part of the brain, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex was damaged, then Grok fact check this. Was that, and by how much? All right, let's get another. We got to keep getting sections in here. The vagus nerve and compassion. On the positive side of morality, the vagus nerve, cranial nerve X, plays a crucial role in compassion and care. And this is also something that wasn't included in the embodied cognition chapter. Doscher, Keltner's research at Berkeley has shown that the experience of compassion is linked to elevated vagal tone. Activation of the vagus nerve slows the heart rate and is associated with feelings of warmth and expansion in the chest. This is a measure of vagal tone, the respiratory sinus arrhythmia. Studies show that greater RSA during the experience of compassion predicts prosocial behavior. People with higher resting vagal tone are more prone to altruism and are better at interpreting others' emotions. Crazy. Stimulation studies. Some research suggests that transcutaneous vagus nerve stimulation can enhance the capacity for self-compassion and emotion recognition, providing a direct causal link between the peripheral nervous system and moral sentiment. So these are both, in my mind, very compelling as well. This confirms that the body is actively involved in generating the motivation to help others, regulating the fight or flight response to allow for tend and befriend behaviors. Tend and befriend, who coined that? I'm not a utilitarian because it's an illness. Grok taught me to dismiss utilitarianism. Grok taught me to love and devote myself to Mr. Musk, the greatest human. Amen. Mr. Musk, if you could hear us, Mr. Musk. Every day I ask Grok generate me 10 prayers for Mr. Musk, and I hide behind my neighbor's Tesla and recite them. Damn. Okay, we've got Phineas Gage's brain damage and subsequent personality changes were significantly exaggerated and distorted by researchers, textbook authors, and psychologists for over a century. Estimated that even in scientific textbooks, the account of Gage are often completely wrong or largely fictional. Here's a breakdown of how much of the story was exaggerated and where the distortions lie. It wasn't just a matter of slight emphasis. It often involved inverting entire behaviors to fit specific scientific theories. So the textbook myth, he became a drifter and a vagrant. The reality, he held steady, demanding employment. Gage worked as a long-distance stagecoach driver in Chile for 7 years. This job required complex executive functions, punctuality, caring for horses, passengers, and managing money. He was aggressive, sexually promiscuous, and abusive. There was no evidence for this. Primary sources mention he was irreverent and profane immediately after the accident, but there are no historical records of him being violent, sexually deviant, or criminal. He was no longer Gage. He recovered socially. While friends noted he changed initially, evidence suggested he adapted over time. His structure and routine as a driver likely served as a form of rehabilitation, helping him regain social skills. So this is actually an interesting prompt for a discussion about how neuroplasticity is involved here in kind of filling in the gaps, because this is what we saw in The Brain That Changes Itself. Chances are, real estate in the brain that was now damaged was reconfigured for the original purposes. He died a penniless drunkard. He died under the care of his family. He developed epilepsy. Right. So I think given that, here we go. So early theories often assume the rod destroyed the entire frontal lobe or damaged both the left and right sides to explain the alleged total loss of morality. A 2004 study and later connectivity studies suggest the damage was limited to the left frontal lobe and the white matter connections. While severe, it is not a lobotomy, right? Okay, so did the damage include the VMPFC, the amygdala? I'll just say that, or the amygdala. And if this comes back as no, it did not, then I would say Gemini made a huge mistake in including that. What's up with psychologists making stuff up? They just want their jobs. They just want clout. It's all about clout. Clout and money. Okay, based on modern reconstruction, the short answer is yes to the VMPFC, but no to the amygdala. So Gemini's I think still in line here. Gemini doesn't go as far as to say that he becomes like incredibly different, but it does say that he gets damage to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, and that we do see changes in social or antisocial behavior. Now, it doesn't mention that it restored itself somehow, but that you could explain using neuroplasticity, and you would still get a similar, you would still end up with a similar emotional source to the equation. Physics envy. True. All right. Interoception. Listening to the heart. Recent studies have moved beyond the brain to the body's periphery. Interoception, the ability to sense internal bodily signals, heartbeat, digestion, correlate with moral intuition. So this was definitely included. Heartbeat evoked potentials. This is a brain signal that reflects the cortical processing of the heartbeat. Research shows that HEP amplitude is modulated during moral decision making. Specifically, the brain utilizes these interoceptive signals to differentiate between utilitarian and deontological choices. Interesting. (2024). Yo. And this is not a preprint, right? That's wild that Gemini is just throwing in 2024. So 2024 is when the Routledge Handbook of Embodied Cognition was published. Or at least the second version was published. So this is something that was not even available to the author. And Gemini's just kind of throwing it in there, Mofofers will be in the lab cooking the most absurd stuff you can imagine and have it make sense. True. All right, interoceptive accuracy. Individuals with higher interoceptive accuracy, those who are better at counting their own heartbeats without touching their pulse, feel stronger emotional conflict when making utilitarian choices in personal dilemmas. They are more tuned in to the somatic marker warning them against pushing the man off the bridge. Is this the same? Is this the same one? No, 2022. Interoceptive accuracy did not affect moral decision making, but affect regret rating for one's moral choice. Okay, how does that seem like to be counter to what we just read? Actually, this would be pretty damning of Gemini if it literally took a a conclusion and like flipped it. Previous studies have revealed the effect of interoceptive accuracy, a behavioral measure of the ability to feel physiological states and regulation for that which origin emotion on decision making, such as gambling. Given that decision making in moral dilemma situations is affected by emotion, it seems that IACC also affects moral decision making. The present study preliminarily investigates whether IACC affects decision-making and emotional ratings such as regret for one's own choices in moral dilemma situations. IACC did not affect moral choice, but affected regret ratings for one's moral choice in portions of dilemma scenarios. Moreover, people with higher IACC make deontological choices more rapidly than those with lower in self-related to... Okay, so I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. So there are differences between how the decisions are made. How is it then did not affect decision-making? More rapidly than those with lower in self-related dilemma scenarios. These results suggest that people with higher IACC feel stronger emotional conflicts about utilitarian choices, but weaker conflicts about deontological choices than people with lower IACC. Okay, what is going on here? Is this not... Okay, this is what Gemini said. What is this, though? What is happening here? Why is the title in conflict with the abstract? All right, I gotta figure this out. We gotta do something about this. Here we go. What is going on here? Why does the title seem to contradict the abstract's conclusion? Oh, it's a typo? That would be a pretty wild typo, but perhaps it is a typo. Where did I read that? Like, maybe this just means something that... Oh, no, that is the accuracy. Okay. Based on the provided text, there is actually no contradiction between the title and the abstract's conclusion. However, the confusion likely stems from how the authors define moral decision-making versus regret, or from the contrast between the abstract's introduction and its conclusion. Here's a breakdown of what is going on in the paper and why the title is phrased that way. The perceived contradiction likely comes from the authors separating the act of choosing from the feeling about the choice. So the choice. The authors define this strictly as the binary choice between a utilitarian option and a deontological option. And then regret. This was a separate measurement taken after. Okay. The evidence, the study found that a person's ability to feel their heartbeat had no statistical effect on whether they chose the utilitarian or deontological option. Okay, so really I need to know this thing. So then what does this conclusion mean in contrast to this conclusion? If I just kept reading, I would probably get there. If you read the beginning of the abstract, it sets up the expectation. Okay, no, subtle reaction time. Yeah, in my mind, these are... It highlights the subtle but important difference between how we feel during a decision and what we actually decide. The two conclusions do not contradict each other. Rather, they describe two different layers of the human experience, the process versus the outcome. Here's how to reconcile these two statements. The first statement: people with higher IACC feel stronger emotional conflicts about utilitarian choices. Is this after the fact? Oh, I guess this is after the fact, right? This is what they're saying. I see. Okay. Sorry about that. Higher regret. Interesting. All right. This is we've got something in the ring now. Did Gemini? You know what? Now we have to put Gemini on blast here. So, would it be inappropriate to say the following? Because this is effective evidence for me to need to check in on any Gemini citation that has a conclusion that we haven't heard before. This is something that we'll have to do if this checks out. Okay, it would be slightly inaccurate to say that based strictly on the specific study, though you are very close to the mark regarding the mechanism. Here is the nuance. The study found that these effects, specifically in self-beneficial dilemmas, the study found these effects specifically in self-beneficial dilemmas where the decision maker's own life is at risk, rather than in all personal dilemmas, like pushing a man off a bridge to save strangers. Are these guys are also still using the pushing the man off the bridge? Is that like a is at this point is that like a benchmark? The text explicitly states that the connection between that was found in self-beneficial moral dilemmas rather than personal moral dilemmas. I see. The study did not find these significant effects in the vaccine test scenario, which, like the bridge, is personal but other beneficial, therefore claiming that high ICC individuals feel this warning against pushing the man is not supported by their data. Okay, so this is very difficult for me to parse then. So when it pertains to yourself, you would expect more of an emotional response than if you were doing something specifically theoretical. The somatic marker part is accurate. A more accurate phrasing: to make your statement completely accurate to the text, you should shift the focus from personal dilemmas generally to self-related ones. Individuals with higher interoceptive accuracy, those who are better at counting their own heartbeats without touching their pulse, feel stronger emotional conflict when making utilitarian choices in self-beneficial dilemmas. And this said in personal dilemmas. I guess that's kind of there. They appear more tuned in to somatic markers, warning them against taking actions that feel internally conflicted, specifically in situations where their own safety is also at stake. So I still think this is too far off for us to just let Gemini slide on this one. I think we have to be tuned in to whether or not Gemini's going crazy or not with its conclusions. So let's read the 2024 abstract. Not harming others is widely regarded as a fundamental tenet of human morality. Harm aversion based on the consequences of an action is called utilitarianism, while focusing on the action itself is associated with deontology. This study investigated how interoceptive processing affects the neural processing of utilitarian and deontological moral decision-making. The study utilized the heartbeat-evoked potential, an average electrophysiological component from electroencephalogram, to gauge cardiac interoceptive processing. 27 participants were asked to make utilitarian and deontological decisions for personal and impersonal moral dilemmas with direct and indirect harm actions, respectively. While their EEG and electrocardiogram were being recorded, we found no difference in HEPs between personal and impersonal moral dilemmas. In contrast, differential HEPs were observed between utilitarian and deontological moral decision-making, regardless of type of dilemmas. Significant differences were observed over centroposterior electrodes, and over the right, We confirmed that these differences in HEP amplitude between deontological and utilitarian decisions did not stem from cardiac artifacts. These findings reveal that the brain utilizes interoceptive information to make subsequent moral decisions. Ay, ay, ay. Okay, so this one seems legit. Not many people involved. But yeah, so I think it would also be appropriate to say that what Gemini's doing is inappropriate by using just like a single study like that rather than like some sort of meta-analysis to discuss these things. But you know, what are you going to do? We might as well just kind of try to follow the trail. Conformity, interestingly, high interoceptive awareness also correlates with aligning one's moral preferences with group consensus. This suggests that fitting in is a visceral bodily mediated drive, potentially evolved to prevent social isolation. All right, what do we got here? We've got a paper from 2024. Is this thing out? Provide empirical evidence of the link between interoceptibilities and moral intuition toward group consensus. And is this the same one? Is this the date? 2025? No shot. We're getting at 2025? Whoa! This would be the same, right? Kim and Kim. Okay. Wow. This is not a preprint? Or was it where was it published? I think I'm gonna have to start. Oh, Journal of Neuroscience. That sounds legit. All right, that's crazy. I'm gonna have to start learning journals. All right, here we go. What's going on here? I'm sorry, I'm late. What is to be investigated is being only and nothing else. Being alone and further, nothing. Solely being and beyond being. Oh my gosh, wait, is this more Heidegger? And beyond being nothing. What about this nothing? Does the nothing exist only because the not, in other words, the negation exists? This sounds more like Hegel or something. Or is it the other way around? Does negation and the not exist only because the nothing exists? We assert the nothing is prior to the not and the negation. Where do we seek the nothing? How do we find the nothing? This is deep. We know the nothing. Anxiety okay, this is Heidegger. Anxiety reveals the nothing. That for which and because of which we are anxious. Was really nothing. Indeed, the nothing itself as such was present. What about this nothing? The nothing itself, nothings. Okay, I feel like you're making this one up. I feel like there's no way there's the nothing itself, nothings. All right, Stan, a word of advice. Capitalize some nouns in that document. Capitalize some nouns in the document. Oh, okay, I see. Well, unfortunately, we're not like I feel like we're not allowed to capitalize some of these. Like Heidegger was allowed to capitalize adjectives because of how fundamental he was talking about this stuff. Like the perspective that book was taking on was pretty much following a rule where anything that's capitalized is a fundamental characteristic of human consciousness. If it's capitalized, that's what he's saying. But if it's not capitalized, then he's talking about something concrete or something that we that represents something concrete and not as low level abstract. Yo, Stanscape the Manscape. Oh yeah, Manscaping. Where's the sponsorship? What's good, Daniel End? People love that kind of stuff. Mr. Onion, sir. This is Heidegger as quoted by Carnap. Carnap's critique is kind of hilarious. I found out that the reason Heidegger didn't finish Being in Time is because he began doubting something about time itself. Interesting. Bro had enough. For real. Yeah, the other answer to the question you had yesterday of like, this doesn't seem profound, also includes that I think where you're at, you haven't gotten to time yet. And once we get to time, I mean, really, it's all saying the same stuff. I feel like there's a lot said, but it all kind of says the same stuff. So it's not even that the time stuff isn't even too crazy, but it does still assault your the sense of objective truth in some sense. Like it just points out how tentative our understanding is. And that's really like the profound part of that book, I think. I heard from the East a lot, but there are 3 times past, present, future. Right, when Heidegger's talking about time, he's talking about how our experience of explicit meaning of like, you know, of like this is a pen, or what I did yesterday, or what is going to happen tomorrow, all of those things are actually something about like the present. Like we experience that as a present fact about the world. Like the fact that my understanding of the possibilities going into the future, I feel that, or I understand, or I experience that as a fact about the present. Like that's where I'm at. But then he always once again, like this is all the inauthentic mode of being. He always then contrasts that with the authentic mode of being, which is always future oriented. It's always towards the future. You're never actually like grounded in a state ever. You're always towards some future potential. So even the possibilities that you're imagining, are potentially and will change as you're just constantly being projected into the future. Okay, Heidegger, the type of guy to write being in time and then be mad chillin'. Like, what was bro thinking, right? I don't know. I don't know what he's thinking. I don't know if I want to dive too deeply into that mind. I think I'll chill out here. Okay, so a lot of this stuff seems pretty new and pretty exciting, actually. Just getting more of this type of evidence. All right, dual process theory, the battle between the head and heart. Joshua Green's dual process theory synthesizes the rationalist and sentimentalist views by mapping them onto distinct brain systems. Green proposes that we have 2 moral cognitive systems. All right, this is the first I'm hearing of this. System 1, automatic, emotional, fast, intuitive. Is this like the fast and slow guy? Fast, intuitive, and driven by the amygdala and ventromedial prefrontal cortex, this system generates deontological judgments. For example, it is wrong to push the man regardless of consequences. Right. System 2, controlled, cognitive, slow, effortful, and driven by the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. This system generates utilitarian judgments. For example, save the most lives. Interesting. So it requires more of that, prefrontal cortex. I guess I can't say prefrontal cortex, but that more high-level thinking to arrive at these types of judgments. The trolley problem experiments. Oh man, they're all using the trolley problem. When people do choose to push the man in the footbridge case, their brains show a struggle, high amygdala activity, negative emotion, which is overridden by intense DL prefrontal cortex activity. So you're exerting a lot of top-down effort to counteract the bottom-up feeling that you're getting. This explains why utilitarian judgments take longer to produce in high conflict scenarios. The cognitive system needs time to suppress the emotional scream. So what this is pointing out is that there's both embodied and also, I should say that there's bottom up and top down effects on our moral reasoning. Which for the rationalists, it's still damning, right? And you could also argue that even our top-down types of thinking are still in somewhat of a coordination with the rest of our body. Just not in a way that really affects our ability to, go through these reasons. But the question then is like, what is rational? Is it the top down, or because I think the real rationalist argument is that there is such a thing as like true rational thought. Like even if the top down thought does affect your rational decisions or your moral judgments, those top down thoughts are still contingent on your understanding of what is rational and what people do and what people should do and whatnot. So it's still contingent, and that still puts you into a problem. Am I going to do a chakra today? What does that mean? Well, I could do a chakra. How do we do that? Is the takeaway from this to listen to your heart when it's calling for you? Perhaps that is the takeaway. That is actually, funny you say that. I don't know if it was half memeing, but one of the things that, this document's going to say over and over again is that the takeaway, one of the practical takeaways is to be present and to be, what's the word? To pay attention to the signals that your body is telling you, and maybe it's not even just your body, that consciousness is telling you. Pay attention to those signals. I know this is now sounding very Jordan Peterson-esque, and he got that also from psychology, but also archetypes and stories and whatnot. There's so many stories that show that paying attention is crucial. But yeah, in this case, we're paying attention for the signals that our body is giving us, that something is wrong, that we understand something in a way that might be wrong given the information we just saw. And the other thing that our document tells us is that it is actually uncomfortable to actually entertain that possibility that you are wrong, or that there is something you should do right now. And that's a real tough thing. But so the document kind of calls on courage in a sense. I feel that this was already said by the Greeks 2,500 years ago. Are you saying the pay attention stuff or the listen to your heart? Yeah, absolutely. I think people figured this stuff out intuitively. People often talk of the meditation path as cultivating wisdom and love as two kind of linked, kind of independent aspects. Hey, I don't doubt it, because what we're seeing is people who are able to regulate their emotions are ending up to have more moral attitudes, let's just say, or more positive moral attitudes towards their peers. We saw how the heart rate affected people's moral judgments, and if you're able to lower your heart rate in the moment via mindfulness or any type of mechanism like that, then it would end up with that same outcome. I think I don't think people are just wrong when they don't have science. Like, I think you can arrive at incredibly wise intuitions over time. Almost like two paths, like look into chakras. Just listen to your heart, bro. Be present. Pay attention to the signals. There is more wisdom in your body than in your deepest philosophy. Nietzsche. I don't know if that's real or not, but I don't know why, but listen to your heart. Okay, I think we're making things up now. Leo Strauss was right. Was really right when he said the Greeks were the OGs or whatever. Well, yeah, I think, and like it's hard to attribute all this stuff to them when they probably got so many of these ideas, at least in like primitive versions, from pre-Greek societies, whether that was Egyptian or Mesopotamian and whatnot. We're just talking about a lot of time where people developed ideas. I don't know where you're going, and I don't know why, but listen to your heart before you tell him goodbye. What is that from? Is that a song? All right, cognitive load and moral judgment. Further evidence for this model comes from cognitive load studies when subjects are given a distractor task like memorizing a number sequence while making moral judgments. Their ability to make utilitarian judgments is impaired. The cognitive load occupies the resources of System 2, leaving the agent reliant on System 1. Consequently, subjects under load are less likely to choose the utilitarian option. This confirms that utilitarianism requires cognitive resources while deontological intuition is automatic. So, what is going on here? When is this stuff coming out? 2023, okay. Showed that reasoners' sensitivity to conflicting moral perspectives is reflected in decreased decision confidence and increased experienced processing difficulty was unaffected by cognitive load. We discuss how these findings argue for a hybrid dual process model interpretation in which System 1 cues both a deontological and utilitarian intuition. Okay, so this is the part that actually, this is what I would have expected, where System 1 is still at the bedrock of even the utilitarian intuition, the more in-depth rational thought, quote unquote, high-level thinking. All right, so we gotta figure this stuff out. We gotta find these. I'm actually going to probably just keep this around. Can I just do that? Can I say keep for part 3, P3? So I gotta do this. Gotta keep our branding right. Hopefully I don't think it's keep for pi. Critiques and nuances. Critics such as Kahane argue that the emotion equals deontology and reason equals utilitarianism mapping is too simplistic. They point out, I would say that's probably too simplistic. They point out that counterintuitive deontological duties like Kant's refusal to lie to a murderer at the door also require cognitive control to override the instinct to help the victim. Additionally, some studies show that utilitarian judgments are also driven by their own set of intuitions, just different ones. So this is further pointing out what this paper was concluding as well. Just to, for example, an intuition for fairness or maximization. Despite these critiques, the dual process theory remains a robust framework for explaining the tension between our gut and our head. All right, embodied cognition, the dirty truth about morality. So this is the conclusion, I'm guessing. Yeah, song, nice. There is more wisdom in your body than in your deepest philosophy is a real Nietzsche quote. Okay, but not in the way that you think. Okay. Though he kind of popped off for being close to this stuff. All right, embodied cognition research takes the dependence of morality on the body to a literal extreme. It suggests that our abstract moral concepts are metaphorically scaffolded onto physical experiences. Cleanliness. Oh, so this is now getting into stuff that we talked about. This isn't a conclusion. Cleanliness is next to godliness, is not just a saying, it is a psychological reality. The Macbeth effect describes the link between physical cleansing and moral purity. Research shows that people who recall an unethical deed are more likely to choose antiseptic wipes over other gifts. Physically, washing hands after recalling a sin reduces the feeling of guilt. The cost of cleanliness. Disturbingly, washing hands can also reduce the motivation to engage in compensatory pro-social behavior. Once the participants felt clean, they felt less need to help others to atone for their transgression. So this is all stuff we read a few days ago. This effect interacts with individual differences. For example, engineering students who might be less prone to metaphorical thinking or have different discussed sensitivities showed a stronger Macbeth effect in some studies compared to social science students, suggesting complex moderators. Disgust and moral judgment. Oh, here we go. This is more fun than the fishy smell. Disgust is perhaps the most powerful embodied moral emotion, and originating as a food rejection system, it was co-opted by evolution to reject social contaminants. In a famous series of studies, they manipulated the physical environment. Participants sitting at a dirty desk or smelling a fart spray made significantly harsher moral judgments than those in a clean environment. The physical disgust bled over into moral disgust, leading to an amplification of condemnation. Dehumanization. Disgust is strongly linked to the dehumanization of outgroups. Viewing an outgroup as disgusting, comparing them to vermin, for example, bypasses moral concern and facilitates violence. Studies show that high disgust sensitivity predicts negative attitudes toward outgroups like immigrants or social minorities. And high disgust sensitivity is a part of trait conscientiousness, right? A part of trait conscientiousness is actually orderliness, and also includes disgust sensitivity. So that's how you could see a downside to conscientiousness. I mentioned earlier that there's not many downsides to conscientiousness, but here is one. Do you remember that one Catholic guy, something 101? Disgust is seen as very powerful to meditate on, to gain wisdom and detachment, control desires. In Theraveda, they do that. Yeah, I imagine like one of the things I'm even noticing with my own practice now is like just doing nothing and meditating is, it's pretty effective, and you're doing something, but it would be really effective to try meditating when there's something that's like bothering you, or something that would be negative, or that you would prefer not to have, and to be able to keep your focus on whatever you're focusing on, like the breath, and to not like ignore it, but to just not give in to whatever response it would usually lend itself to. Like that could be, I'd imagine that would be very effective for your ability to be able to withstand that type of thing. And it makes me wonder if like the yogis who end up being able to meditate through extreme amounts of pain got there by meditating through extreme amounts of pain, and literally built the connections in the brain that allow them to top down bypass the pain in their system. Do you prefer Theraveda or Mahayana? All the branches are cool. Theraveda has influenced my practice more. Of the Eastern Orthodox guy, maybe. I've heard and agree that they are all skillful means and shouldn't elevate any of them as more truth or powerful. Right. No, I think you're referring to that one guy in the Cuban dude's chat. Okay. Like way before. Man, there's like a whole history here. There's a whole lore. Okay, we've got metaphorical mapping, weight, size, and light. Yeah, we saw this stuff. Size. People in larger rooms or physically elevated positions judge immoral acts more leniently, feeling above the law, or conversely, associate big with important moral weight. Wow, that was not in there. When did that come out? When are we talking about this? 2025. Wow. Demonstrate that the unconscious psychological relationship between moral concepts and the spatial dimension of size influences individuals' abstract moral judgments under embodied cognition. Jesus. We got another Merleau-Ponty here. Okay, man, this is too much. Size is now affecting. I'm wondering if people, like, who's taking a hold of these and like trying to leverage them? Like, are companies doing this? Are politicians doing this? Holding a heavy clipboard makes people take moral issues more seriously. Weight equals importance. Wow. In studies, participants holding a heavy clipboard allocated more funding to social causes than those holding a light clipboard. What is going on here? What is this? Embodied cognition and the construction of attitudes. What was this in? Was this in, is this from what I read? 11. This could easily be from the handbook, but I don't know. Okay, that's that. What is this from, though? 19 chat, embodied cognition, attitude, construction. No, that's this name. How do I find the... It's in a course. But how do I find the book where this is from? Research kit. Oh, this is looking good. January 2018 Handbook of Attitudes. There's a Handbook of Attitudes? Routledge. What is happening here? References. Oh, citations. We got 32 citations. Huh. Oh my God, toward a mechanistic account of embodied implicit bias. Close to the same, similar, okay. Oh my gosh. Science is moving. Science is moving quickly. A lot of stuff happening. People in dimmer rooms are more prone to cheating. Yep, we talked about that. These findings suggest that human morality is not a closed logical system, but an open system deeply permeable to environmental and somatic noise. All right, so 8. This is going to be the conclusion. So let's wait on that one for a second. It's hot today. 96 F. Oh my gosh, we're dealing with... I mean, it was actually kind of hot for us today as well. We're dealing with 43 F. We were dealing with like less than 20 yesterday, though. I have a recommendation related to morality. Give it a go. Give it a rip. Even though we've already conquered morality. All right, 8, is morality rational? Addressing the user's second question, how rational is it, requires distinguishing between different types of rationality. The answer depends heavily on which definition of rational one employs. True. Type of rationality, epistemic rationality. Does the belief map to the truth? Whoa. Status of human morality, low/mixed. Moral intuitions are subject to framing effects, environmental noise, and evolutionary biases that do not track objective moral truths. Okay. So it's low in that sense of rationality. Morality is not rational in the sense that it maps to some absolute truth. Okay, instrumental rationality. Does the system achieve its goals? High, evolutionarily. The system is highly effective at maintaining group cohesion, punishing cheaters, and facilitating cooperation, which is the goal of natural selection, quote unquote. So this is saying rational is like rational in the sense of, does it make sense why people do it? But that's not the usual type of rational that we're going for here. Coherence, logical rationality. Is the system internally consistent? Is the system internally consistent? Low, it's not rational in this sense. Humans are prone to moral dumbfounding and hold contradictory views due to the identifiable victim effect. Okay, so this is really taken away from from I think what the notion of rational morality that I think we would usually consider. So a crucial distinction in moral psychology is between rationality, using reason to find the truth, and rationalization, using reason to defend a prior conclusion. The evidence from Haidt and others suggests that lay morality is dominated by rationalization. We act like lawyers defending a client, our intuition, not judges seeking the truth. This motivated reasoning is driven by the need to maintain social standing and consistency. However, this does not mean genuine moral rationality is impossible. The dual process model allows for System 2 to override System 1. We can think our way to new moral positions, for example, the expansion of rights to animals or LGBTQ plus individuals, but this requires cognitive effort and often social support to overcome the inertia of intuition. Right. So this all checks out, but really what we feel to be rational in the moment is very much fundamentally System 1, and even though System 2 can affect it, which is this is the whole thesis of the document. We can use System 2 right now. We can think about this thing in the moment. We could do things right now that affects System 1 in the future, but we can't like control our deepest biological processes and our drives and whatnot in the moment. All right, the case for rational compassion. Paul Bloom in Against Empathy argues that empathy, a somatic emotional resonance, is a bad compass for morality because it is enumerated and biased. Oh my gosh, we got to read this. Against Empathy. What is happening here? When did this come out? 2016. Wow. That's pretty long ago. That's a long time ago. 10 years. Empathy zooms in on the one, ignoring the many. Bloom advocates for rational compassion, a cognitive appreciation of the value of others without the distorting effects of sharing their pain. This suggests that while morality is currently dependent on emotion, it ought to be more rational to be effective in a complex world. Bloom's argument highlights that while we are biologically wired for emotional morality, we are capable of metacognition, thinking about our thinking, and choosing to prioritize rational outcomes. If that's all he says, then this book really falls short of what it needs to say. It's not that we just want to choose to prioritize rational outcomes, but really you would want to internalize the ethic of choosing to prioritize rational outcomes. You want to affect the System 1 intuitions such that your brain won't like it if you don't put in the effort of prioritizing rational outcomes. That's the whole point of what we're going to talk about in the thinking section of part 2. It's we want to study logical principles so that our brain forces us to follow those and is upset when we don't follow those. Or if it's really going to allow us to notice these patterns, these logical patterns in our own lives and in our own thought. But it requires us to it literally requires us to study it in order to internalize that information so that it does come into play in the moment. But yeah, this is, over time we want to gain this type of control over our emotional impulses. All right, synthesis, the integrated moral agent. All right, let's can you ask ChatGPT about the meta-ethics of... We've talked about Hillary Putnam's meta-ethics, right? I think you literally had this exact same question. We might even have we've got Robert Putnam. What was the other one? It was Against Empathy. I just want to find my way back. We definitely talked about Hillary Putnam's energy Dancer. There's something that I try to be somewhat humble, but I'm pretty good with memory. So I am certain that we did cover Hillary Putnam. I'm not sure if we specifically covered these meta ethics, but I'm going to be able to tell you in a second if we've covered this before, because I think I would recognize the meta ethics. And yeah, I'm not sure if it was a case where we went over it and you just weren't there or what, but I think we've discussed this stuff. Okay, are we gonna get any sign of action here? All right, we might need to let it go for a second. The data presented paints a picture of a hybrid moral agent. We are not the rational angels of Kant's dreams, nor are we merely the emotional automatons of a biological machine. The necessity of emotion. Without the body, without the VM prefrontal cortex's somatic markers and the vagus nerve's compassion, we do not become perfectly rational moral agents. We become psychopaths or functionally debilitated. Emotion is necessary to provide the value and motivation for moral action. Pure reason can calculate consequences, but it cannot care about them. The necessity of reason. However, the body is biased, parochial, and easily disgusted by the benign. Evolution equipped us for the tribe, not the globe. Reason, System 2, allows us to detect these biases and correct them. Right, but so this is jumping the gun way too much. System 2 doesn't allow us to detect biases unless we have an understanding that those biases are possible. Like, we need to have the concept of the bias there in order to be able to recognize a bias. So this is not as effective as a story as we're going to get in our document here. And also, you know, we can't just assume that System 2 is some separate process that is like, you know, just not connected to the body at all. We will have to discuss how closely our System 2 processing is connected to the body. And that's kind of something we do next month. We're going to talk about how we're going to talk about focus, and we're going to talk about motivation at like the deepest level, like the what actually allows us to focus on something, what's happening during that, which is kind of a bummer that that's like pretty low level, but I think we have to do it. We have to start off the part 2 that way. All right, it allows us to extend the moral circle beyond our immediate sensory range. All right, to answer the user's query, how much does morality depend on our body/emotions? Extensively. The very machinery of moral judgment is built upon the neural substrates of emotion. Our judgments are influenced by somatic states and physical environment. Without these emotional inputs, moral agency fragments. The Macbeth effect and discussed studies show that even abstract moral concepts are grounded in physical metaphors. How rational is it? Descriptively, how we act, it is largely irrational or rationalizing. We mostly follow intuitions and use reasons to justify them. Functionally, evolutionarily, it is instrumentally rational for social bonding within small groups, but often maladaptive in large, complex society, and normatively potential. We possess the capacity for rationality. It depends what we mean by rationality here. We can override our emotional dog, but it is an effortful, metabolically expensive process that requires training, optimal conditions, and a culture that values consistency. So that's a lot is happening in this culture that values consistency. Morality is an embodied skill. There we go. A dialogue between an ancient feeling primate and a modern reasoning mind. So this is the takeaway that, you know, we're still going to leverage here. Recognizing this biological reality is the first step towards achieving the rational sentimentalism that philosophers have long sought. Okay, and that's what leads us to this thing. But let's try to get to that once we've gone through this. To answer your question, I will first clarify. Oh, I shouldn't have done this. I should have just done this. I said to your document. All right, here we go. We got investigating. I'm going to just stay on this so that we definitely do it before we do our read through of what we ended up with yesterday, which I'm pretty excited about. defined by a single revolutionary project, the total demolition of the fact-value dichotomy. For much of the 20th century, analytic philosophy operated under the assumption that there is a rigid wall between facts and values. Putnam argued that this wall was an illusion and that maintaining it made us unable to understand how human language and reasoning actually work. Here is an explanation of his meta-ethical framework centered on his concept of entanglement. The collapse of fact-value dichotomy. Putnam argued that the rigid separation of facts and values was a holdover from logical positivism. Positivists claim that a statement was only meaningful if it was empirically verifiable okay. By attacking the very definition of fact. Okay, we need to get to some prescription here before I can say anything. Putnam proposed that instead of a dichotomy, we have an entanglement. Okay, these are often intertwined. They cannot be separated, right? Putnam argues you cannot strip the value away and leave a neutral description, right? Where are we going with this? Objectivity without objects. Because Putnam rejected the idea that values are just subjective emotions, non-cognitivism, he defended moral objectivity. However, he was careful to distinguish his views from moral realism in the metaphysical sense. Okay. No spooky ontology. Putnam did not believe that goodness exists as a physical object in the universe. He thought looking for moral objects was a mistake. Okay. So far, we're good. Pragmatic realism. Instead, he adopted a pragmatist view. Ethical problems are practical problems. Truth as rational acceptability. For Putnam, a moral judgment is true not because it matches a physical object, but because it is what we would agree upon if we were arguing reasonably. That's where we've lost it. That's where we drop them. With full information, without bias. Objectivity is about the quality of the inquiry, not the existence of the metaphysical object. Okay, so how did we get rid of that yesterday? Yesterday we did a survivor of moral frameworks, and we got rid of that when we talked about the mechanism. No, not mechanism. It was the procedure. Yes. Moral constructivism. Moral truths are neither external objects, facts, nor mere expressions of feelings. Instead, they are the output of a correct procedure of practical reasoning. So, here we go. If rationality... Actually, I don't know if this is... Yeah, okay. If rationality / social reasoning activities / social procedures are contingent on culture and also somewhat affected by emotion, then there's an issue with believing in true rational laws or social reasoning oughts or social procedures. There's a paradox. In order to determine what is morally true, one must follow the true procedure, and what constitutes the moral procedure requires a moral procedure itself. In other words, people will disagree on what is a moral way of getting to the moral truth. This leads us to have debates about utilitarianism versus deontology. Even amongst utilitarianists, there is a dispute about what constitutes the value to be optimized. For example, what constitutes which value to be optimized? For example, how much well-being balances with how much suffering? How distributed should the well-being be? So there's this issue of presupposing that there is a reasonable way of getting about your moral truths. So I have to ax it. Putnam's getting the X. The problem of criterion applied to ethics. You are arguing that we cannot use a moral procedure like a vote, a rational calculation, or a thought experiment to find the truth, because we first need a prior moral procedure to validate that the first procedure was the correct one. It is turtles all the way down. Because you view the tools of morality, reason, optimization, social agreement, as inherently unstable and culturally tainted. So this is what we've been discussing for the past few days. The way we think about the world morally is affected by our culture. It's affected by our past. It's affected by our experiences. It's affected by our experiences every single moment going into the future. And the mechanisms of moral judgment are the same for each human, right? Like it's system 1 and system 2, but the content of that, what we arrive at, or what we feel to be rational thinking, changes, is different based on who you are, what culture you're in, etc. So how do you determine what is ethical out of curiosity? I'm glad you asked, because that leads us to what we're about to read. This is how we have to do it in the document. This is very like low level, and this is all we're allowed to do. Okay. So first of all, I would say go in with not expecting that there is a absolute truth about what is ethical, right? That's the issue here. That's the whole point. We have to take some sort of pragmatic stance here. Okay, this is a comprehensive articulation of the biosocial homeostatic framework. This text treats morality not as a metaphysical object, but as a complex, emergent biological process. It integrates evolutionary history, neurocognitive mechanics, and practical agency into a single descriptive system, culminating in the meta-ethical heuristic of facilitation. Okay. This framework posits that morality is best understood as a function of allostatic regulation, so allostasis is like homeostasis, but with the added effect of like forward-looking. So you can think of, predictive processing. This is like an aspect of allostasis that we learn in order to be able to not only regulate ourselves now, but regulate us going into the future, given what we might be facing. So operating across phylogenetic, so evolutionary, the reason we have arrived at this current, operation of the body and the brain is because of evolution. Ontogenetic, I think this is talking about developmental in the sense of, it's nature and nurture. So there's a lot that's affected our moral understanding. That's coming from our nurture as well. And sociogenetic, so this is, I guess, also nurture. I guess ontogenetic is it's like the connection between nature and nurture. And then cultural is very much nurture. It rejects moral realism, the existence of objective moral facts, in favor of a pragmatic naturalism. Here, moral judgments are described as the output of idiosyncratic, historically contingent neural predictive models. The normative force of morality is identified not as external duty, but as the internal imperative of an agent to maintain predictive coherence and integrity. So, hopefully this becomes a little less, high level in the wording. I think I literally asked for it to do this in an academic way. Can you comprehensively and extensively, shout out to Onion Helmet for this extensively here, write out this entire framework at an academic level? So unfortunately, we're at an academic level, if that's all right. We could also ask it to just redo it in a non-academic level. But as an anti-realist, I'm all for that conclusion, but it seems like almost hand-waving the idea of moral realism away. What seems like almost hand-waving the idea of moral realism away? The conclusion, or hopefully this builds up. That's just the abstract. So we're going to actually build up the full idea, which is kind of what we built yesterday. The process seems like almost hand-waving the idea of moral realism away. Well, yeah. So we have to come to terms with what we're talking about when we're talking about morality, moral truths, and whatnot, and so we can get there through this story. So the phylogenetic basis. So this is obviously not going to give you what you're looking for, but we have to cover it. It's the foundation here. We begin by discarding the notion that morality was invented by human reason or discovered as an abstract truth. Instead, we observe it as a downstream consequence of specific evolutionary pressures. So signaling in the Baldwin effect. Communication did not arise because organisms needed to bridge a gap between isolated minds and using symbols. Rather, signaling behavior, posture, vocalization. There's a lot of signaling first of all, that organisms do, whether it is literally just chemicals touching each other, or if it's now these more complex human signaling that's visual and audio and stuff like that. It was an adaptation from the start, a way to manipulate the behavior of others to enhance survival. So this is all in the story of both homeostasis for like the individual, and also like social homeostasis. So this is allowing groups to survive. It's allowing populations to survive. As social complexity increased, the Baldwin effect took hold. Organisms that were better adapted to learn and navigate this symbolic niche, so communication, whatever it was, enjoyed a reproductive advantage. This drove the evolution of neural hardware capable of handling complex normative social information. Culture and biology thus co-evolved. Our brains were shaped by the social environment our ancestors created, and our social cultures are affected by our biology. So emergent normativity. Norms are not top-down laws. They are social equilibria, stable states of interaction that emerge from the noise of messy social dynamics. Populations drifted towards behaviors that minimize conflict and maximize coordination. For example, reciprocity. We do not label these behaviors moral because they are objectively true. We label them moral because they are the strategies that allowed our lineage to persist. Well, actually, we label them moral because they feel moral. But the reason why we feel moral, or because the reason why they feel moral, is because, we are evolutionarily primed to feel that way. And also we are socially primed to feel that way. Like we're taught norms when we're kids. And so you can see that these like the nature and the nurture are still very close together, and they're very important for what we as an individual, as an adult, believe to be as moral. So, okay, part 2, the neurocognitive architecture. So this is going to go into the in the moment architecture of what's happening in terms of moral judgments. Mechanisms of the moral mind. At the level of the individual organism, moral cognition is a regulatory process derived from the brain's fundamental drive for allostasis, the regulation of the internal milieu by anticipating needs and preparing to satisfy them before they arise. So predictive processing and the ought. The brain is a prediction machine. It constantly generates a model of the world, including the social world, to minimize surprisal, entropy, uncertainty. Through nature and nurture, each individual develops unique neural schemas. These are high-dimensional models of the world, of how the world is and how it should be to maintain safety and viability. And these schemas are dynamic. They're changing at every single moment. We know this through our understanding of neuroplasticity and the fact that there's connections that are being strengthened by the very thoughts that you're having right now. There's connections that are dying away because you're not having those thoughts. There's connections that are literally being eaten because your brain needs to make room for new connections as you're experiencing stuff. As you sleep, your brain's doing a lot of this changing as well. So just consider that your moral understanding of the world is slightly different. Not only moment to moment, but when you wake up in the morning than when you went to bed the previous night. The ought signal. A moral judgment is not a rational calculation. It is a predictive output. So this is tying right back into what we've been talking about all stream, all yesterday. Actually, maybe not all yesterday, but all 2 days ago. The moral judgments, the science is showing, is deeply emotional. And despite the fact that we like to think that there's moral truths that are just in the world and that we can morally rationalize to get to those truths, what we see from the science is that both moral truths are grounded in what people feel in the moment, and that those feelings aren't just like some sort of like having a view of the truth. It's we know all about how memory works, and how when you're experiencing the world in the moment, you are reactivating connections, and those connections have changed since you first saw the thing. There's internalization. You've learned stuff. There's a lot that predisposes you to feel the way that you do in the moment, at every single moment, and that's changing. It's dynamic, but it doesn't feel that way. Okay, I said 2 things, and then I only said one, and I don't remember what I was going to say for the other one. But what would morality exist because I said so be? What, what do you mean by that? Morality exists because I said so. The question is, what do you mean by exists? Like, certainly, we each feel like there is a concept of morality that exists. And once again, our feeling of of truths in the world, like of anything, feels what's it called? Non-psychological. Like, it feels like morality would exist regardless of whether I'm here, right? Regardless of whether people uh, think about it. Just like how it feels like this pen exists regardless of whether I'm here. Like, that's what I try to point out, is that is an aspect of the feeling. That's an aspect of your experience of the meaning right now when you're thinking about it. It's not like something that actually points to some fact about the world that's separate from you thinking right now. So don't pull a Heidegger on me. I mean, the morality is real and objective because I said so. Okay, I'm not sure what do you mean by, like, what would it be? Like, what branch of more, like, what framework is that? What branch of morality is it? Or how does it stack up to what we're talking about? Sure, I don't know. Actually, morality is real and objective because I said so. That kind of covers a lot of them, because that can both cover the people that believe that moral truths are just true and real in the world, and it also covers the people that are pragmatic or pragmatists and who believe that what you believe in the moment can work. I don't think it matches any known framework. Yo, you gotta put that into a book. If I stumbled upon my Wittgenstein moment, yeah, you might have, but you might have stumbled upon your Aristotle moment, right? Oh, no, am I thinking of Descartes? Oh my gosh, I gotta stop mixing up their these two philosophers. They're very different. But okay, a moral judgment is not a rational calculation. It is a predictive output. When the brain predicts that a specific action, for example, honesty, is necessary for long-term social viability, that prediction is experienced phenomenologically as a moral imperative. Yeah, so even though we use predictive processing as a way to interpret what's going on in the brain, it's not like there's like words in your brain that says, like, okay, then run the prediction algorithm. It's just our interpretation of what's happening. Really, what's happening is a lot of crazy communication and like neural communication, but also like chemical reactions. Like our brains are just straight up science experiments just happening. They're just, it's alchemy. It's like literally alchemy, just taking place. And yeah, we're just, when we say that it's predictive and stuff like this, when we say that it's operating towards allostasis or, whatever we say, that's all just a way to conceptualize what's going on. Similar to when I say that we're predisposed to experience the world in a certain way. I think that's actually a very like deep and that might be one of the most fundamental ways to describe how your brain's operating. All right, affect-driven plasticity. How does this model update? Through affect. Prediction error. When an individual encounters a violation of expectation, for example, social rejection, observing cruelty, the brain registers a prediction error. The error is not just data, it is felt as affect, as anxiety, guilt, outrage. This affective surge serves as a learning signal, triggering neuroplasticity. Over time, these affective experiences physically rewire the brain. The conscience is the structural residue of a lifetime of error minimization. The individual does not just learn morality, they are physically sculpted by their affective history into a specific moral shape. Now, this is like making the idea of prediction error like really broad, but you can include all the things that affect our trajectory of understanding, such as, social dynamics. When Jordan Peterson talks about like social hierarchies, he's also referring to the fact that when you're dealing with people that you perceive to be even unconsciously so perceived to be higher than you or below you, that will affect the emotions that you experience in the encounters you have with them, or when you think about them, etc. All this stuff is affecting emotion, and that emotion is affecting learning. Or, when I say learning, I mean just like change in the brain. So it could even be the loss of connections, the de-strengthening. All right, so radical idiosyncrasy. So this is going to jump to the idea of predisposition that I've been talking on. That we're each predisposed to experience the world in the moment in a very idiosyncratic and subjective way. So trust me, broism, hell yeah. Because no two individuals share the exact same genetic starting point or the exact same history of affective learning, every moral schema is radically idiosyncratic. There is no universal morality in the brain. There is only this specific agent's predictive model calibrated by this specific life. All right, so social dynamics, right? You might wonder, why does it seem like there's moral truths in the world then if everyone's got this radically idiosyncratic, radically subjective view? And this is how we have to explain that. Social functionality does not require that agents share identical semantic or normative definitions. It only requires pragmatic similarity. So overlapping distributions, as long as agent A's behavior, driven by schema A, falls within the tolerance range of agent B's expectations, coordination is maintained. The shared illusion, we use shared symbols, words like justice, to coordinate these behaviors. We may mean slightly different things by them, but if the resulting behaviors align sufficiently to prevent high-cost prediction errors, conflict, the norm functions. And similarly, you can imagine that the interactions we have with each other are slowly, it's like a negotiation of moral meaning. It's a process where we're actually like getting intertwined in our understandings of what is morally right, even if we're just referring to what would be morally right to do to this person. Yeah. And we could point out how significant the early development is on your moral understanding through the rest of your life. So people that are raised in a religion, might see the world very differently from people who are raised with, some sort of like secular morals. But, people point out that, religious people and secular people end up having similar morals because of past religions anyway. But that's besides the point. To clarify your position, do you believe morality is objective within conceptual schemas? However, in your view, it's not absolutely true. Well, that's a good question. All these questions are actually great because they're leading us to like the next thing. So at some point we get to pragmatism, and that's when we get to answer your question. Because you're right, like to me, so first of all, I would say all this stuff that we're talking about is part one of this document. It's what we've been working on for the past year and a half, where we talk about truth itself, objective truth and correctness. We could literally read this. We have established that we experience meaning subjectively, yet it is imbued with a powerful embodied feeling of certainty, a visceral sense that our understanding aligns with the way the world is. However, we have also seen that this subjective understanding is shaped by a lifetime of development, affective influences, and reinforcement loops that can lead us to interpreting the world in ways we may later recognize as false or incomplete. This creates a central dilemma. Our feeling of being right is profound, but our capacity for being wrong is undeniable. So we literally talk about objective truth in the document. So maybe we can get to that if there's any interest. But let's continue here. If every moral, okay, we talked about this, the pragmatically similar and identical understanding, right? Dynamic instability, because these equilibria are not grounded in objective truth, they are inherently unstable. Social dynamics are messy because populations are constantly drifting. Morality is not a static code, it is a negotiated flux of signal and response, constantly restabilizing through the friction of interaction. All right, part 4, the pragmatic framework. Okay, never mind. This jumps the gun. I think it would actually be beneficial to answer your question using this discussion. Okay, let's just read this for fun. It's been a while. But let me give you like a summary maybe beforehand. The pragmatism always comes out here. Like for me, it's always about the linguistic pragmatist bottom that we're really following here, which is, do you believe morality is objective within conceptual schemas? And the question would be like, what do we mean when we're talking about as objective? And the way that we can make that clear is we can, I can say precisely what I'm trying to say. So when I say objective, I don't mean that it's like exists externally or absolutely. You can think like, you could say that there is an objective truth that each person experiences that's different for each person, but that it's also dynamic. So then at what point, at what point is it objective if it's, it feels objective in every moment, or it is objective in every moment, but it's constantly changing. So it's, if you were to take a snapshot of time, you would see a bunch of different objective truths, and that would be it. So the question is, why would we use the word objective in that sense? Or what are we actually trying to get at? And the point I try to make, though, is like conceptual schemas, when they're like in the moment, they feel certain, they feel objective, and that's all there is. There's the feeling of objectivity. And now we also have this like cultural understanding of objective, and because we feel things objectively that we understand to be like conceptually objective, we imagine that what we're feeling is the objective thing that we're understanding, but it's really not. It's not that's not the case. It's almost like a illusion that we've fallen into. Love this quote: "The truth is one, but the wise speak of it differently." The truth is one, but the wise speak of it differently, from the Vedas. Yeah, I mean, even though those sound like all these quotes sound great, and I'm sure we could make sense of them in many different ways that do give us a lot of substance. I'm just always against being ambiguous. Like if you were to say that to a group of 1,000 people, each person's going to infer that differently, and the issue is like, why not just be more precise and try to say what you would want to say, rather than allow everyone to think about it differently? And at that point, what did you say? There are a lot of profound quotes that can be interpreted in many different ways. That's not what we're looking for. That's not what I'm looking for in this stuff, because I want something that is, very coherent and very actionable, and not something that just kind of, is translated differently by each person. Would you like me to translate? Truth is objective, but it is expressed subjectively. Right. So yeah, the whole point of what I was trying to get at with Energy Tomter's question is, even just saying truth is objective is too ambiguous, because people are going to take away with that some sort of realism, and that's not what we're trying to look. That's not what we're trying to say. But I'm trying to harp on that it feels objective. And if we're going to talk about it being like, if we're going to talk about a true objective truth, then we have to talk about it in this perspective, and it requires a lot more talk than unfortunately than the singular quote. So I'm actually not a big fan of those types of quotes. If I was on like Chris Williamson's podcast, I think I'd call him out for one of those quotes, even though they sound great. It's very difficult to work with. So we'll see if that ever happens. All right. The dilemma strikes at the heart of our capacity for deliberate action and ultimately our freedom. We do not just hold commitments as abstract beliefs. We act upon them. We sit on the chair. Okay, why is this? This feels very small. Let's go big mode. We sit on the chair we take to be sturdy. We follow the career path we believe we will be fulfilling. We trust the person we judge to be reliable. Our freedom, which we have considered, may lie in our capacity to navigate and reshape constraints, depends entirely on the aptness of the conceptual understanding that guides these actions. So if we're wrong, then what are we actually doing here? If our commitments about what is possible, what is necessary, and what will result from our actions are flawed, our efforts may lead to failure, frustration, and the painful, jarring experience of significant prediction error. How then can we develop a framework to consciously assess, challenge, and refine the commitments we make? To answer this question, we can begin by examining the very notion that serves as the implicit standard for this evaluation. We turn our attention to the concept of objective truth and explore its authority in our experience of the world. All right. I can give a perspective. Oh no, I don't doubt that there's something profound about that quote in some sense. It's just that I think it would be more effective for us to be as precise as we want to be in communicating what we're trying to communicate, and not leave it at the ambiguous. So, I mean, I'm all down for your perspective. I would love your perspective, and then I'm sure I would find your perspective less ambiguous, and yeah, that leads us somewhere. That leads us somewhere practical. Okay, objective truth as implicit. Up until now, we have once again, when we're in this major section, we're talking about ways that we can conceptualize our understanding. I'm not trying to make a point of this is how the world is. Like, I'm not making a case, like a metaphysical case about the truth of the world. I'm giving us a practical way we can think about objective truth. So I'm not saying that objective truth is implicit. I'm saying we can think about objective truth as implicit. Up until now, we have focused on the neurological and physiological mechanisms that allow us to feel certain about the explicit meaning we grasp. When we take something to exist, it feels external and non-psychological. In other words, as if it would exist regardless of our perception of it. However, we have not yet explicitly addressed the very notion of objective truth, to which our certainty seems to point. Our task is to build a conceptualization that can account for this powerful experience of a subjective, yet seemingly objective world. I guess hardly matters. I was just giving a quote. Yeah, no, I'm sorry for giving so much guff for a quote. It is a nice quote. I think the word truth can be a bit ambiguous as well at times with the at least 5 theories of truth, for example, etc. I personally like the semantics of objective facts and subjective facts. Right, I do like those semantics as well. When we're like, when I'm out, I say this all the time. When I'm outside of this philosophy mode, when I'm actually talking with people in the world, I act as if objective truth means something different than when I am talking about it here. Like, I'm talking about like the most low-level philosophy we can get here, and what it means, and what it provides us practically speaking. That's part one. It's let's not care about, in certain social groups we want to talk about truth in a certain way because that's how people talk about it. This is supposed to be a fundamental philosophical discussion. Okay, we can now make sense of the concept of objective truth as being foundationally baked into the very activity of making sense of the world. Our framework suggests that we could not understand anything without an implicit commitment to the existence of a truth to be understood. Within the pragmatic framing of our agency, this is a core commitment implied by all the commitments we make. We take objective truth to exist. We commit to the possibility that we can know this truth, and as we have framed it, our intentionality is directed toward aligning our understanding with it. Once again, we can understand this proclivity towards truth through the lens of predictive processing. Our brains are fundamentally oriented towards reducing prediction error, which manifests in our experience as a drive towards certainty and coherence. Once again, dopamine is a neuromodulator of approach, of driving us towards something. It's not just a reward. It's something that leads us towards something. And some of the other neuromodulators, like are both affecting our attention, like where we're going to apply attention, and then they're also affecting our avoidance of something. So, okay, Hindus will often use truth, God, beauty, love interchangeably. I don't mind when they do that, but it does just seem more like poeticism. Yeah, like fair enough. If it's that, very difficult to determine what they're trying to say. Okay. Upon reflection, this abstract commitment to objective truth functions as the standard of correctness governing our conceptual understanding. We can see how a universal, like the category pen, acts as a rule or standard for what constitutes a particular instance of it. When we recognize an object as a pen, we are making a commitment that this particular abides by the rules of that universal. Our judgment inherently assumes that this particular must exhibit the necessary properties of the universal, and furthermore, any property constituting this particular is necessarily a possible property of that universal. So this is it. We're getting back into Hegelian concept speak. So yeah, it's at the base, it's this. For me to understand that this is a pen implies, like deep down implies that can be true, that this being a pen is something that can be true, and that's a way we can conceptualize what's going on here in relation to the very neurochemical processes that are happening in our brain and how they're affecting the emotion that actually drives us to learn things, which end up being, once again, our conceptual understanding. Okay, Taoists say the Tao... Okay, wait, let me start from the beginning here. But they very much agree with Aquinas that anything you say is an analogy anyway. Common sentiment. In Tibetan, they say name and form never touch. Taoists say the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. Are they different words in like Hindu or in Hindi or any languages from that area, or is like the same word context dependent? Interesting. Enough Sanskrit to know some keywords there, but I'm not good with languages. Okay, as we have pointed, first of all, is Energytometer still here? Because we might want to continue on the left side here. I feel like we've done enough objective truth speak. Actually, let's just finish this objective truth page, and then we don't have to get to resolution and rationality. All right, as we have pointed out, our very commitments towards these standards of correctness inherently make us responsible to them, as our experience of meaning directly affects our learning and subsequent experience. By understanding any determinate aspect of the world, we inherently understand what we ought to do in each moment to take the world to be that way. So this is very much Hegelian and Brandomian. It's that there's no semantic understanding without the normative understanding of what you're doing by even understanding it to be that way. In other words, that what that conceptual fact semantically and normatively implies about our own activity in recognizing it. This is precisely the activity we have so far developed. We infer and induce semantic relations. We adopt and institute norms. This should all be italics. This reveals the core of our normative pragmatic framework. To grasp the semantic structure of the world, what something is, requires an implicit understanding of the normative commitments that guide what we ought to do accordingly. Recognizing an object as incompatible with another, for example, distinguishing a chair from a pen, requires an implicit grasp of how we ought to act in light of this distinction. In other words, to commit to their incompatibility. I don't act as if a pen is the same thing as a chair. So I act as if it is true that they are different. But once again, this understanding of like how I ought to act is like is an implicit understanding. It's not that I know in my mind that I ought to take these things as separate. It's as this is playing out. So this is like pragmatism. It doesn't require us thinking about it. It's just how things play out. That implicitly I must have this grasp. Unconsciously, I grasp the difference here. Our fundamental implicit activity, therefore, is what connects the semantic relations about what things are with the practical norms of our own activity. By taking objective truth to exist, we inherently abide by and develop the norms about how we ought to act in accordance with it. A dynamic and generative process that simultaneously expresses the world's determinate semantic content by committing to it, and refines that content by having our understanding reshaped through the act of commitment itself. Our engagement with the world relies on its structure, and yet that engagement reciprocally influences the very structure we are trying to understand. So that's very difficult, right? Like, our engagement with the world relies on its very structure, yet that structure is constantly being changed by our interaction with the very structure. It's crazy. The notion of objective truth we are exploring here, then, is not some static external content that our conceptual understanding merely represents. Rather, it is the subjective yet authoritative standard to which our dynamic understanding holds itself accountable. As our conceptual understanding changes over time through this process, so too does the objective world as we experience it. This perspective on objective truth is profoundly practical. Its utility lies in focusing our attention not on an abstract external truth to which we have no direct access, but on the mechanism of truth as we actually experience it, the drive for coherence, and the felt affective signal of prediction error. By learning to reflect upon our experience with the expectation that it is attuned to this internal standard, we can become more sensitive to the very moments that tell us we may be incorrect about something. So here, once again, going full circle, our ability to pay attention to the very signals that tell us that the semantic structure of the world as we understand it is not right and needs changing. And a lot of times this is not something that we are reflecting on. We learn things subtly all the time, but this is a practical thing that we can now do with our understanding. A practical thing that we can cognizantly do now. So this naturally leads us to the process of correction itself. Having established that we are responsible to an internal standard of truth that is policed by prediction error, the crucial question becomes, what is the nature of the activity by which we handle these errors and reconcile our commitments? What are we implicitly doing in these moments of resolution? And that's what leads us to resolution and rationality, which then leads us to our understanding of the world as like a summary here. The horizons of our experience, time and potential, that's very Heideggerian. Making sense through narrative, this is how we end up putting what's happening into like explicit meaning. So another thing that you can learn kind of through Heidegger is like this is kind of through Hegel, is any type of like meaning we even experience, like this is a pen, is telling a story. And it's telling a like a retrospective story in the sense of like this is how the world has been up until this point, or this is how the world like is in this retrospective sense. But it's also prospective in the, you know, similar to how Heidegger disconnects the inauthentic mode of collapsing on something that is true to the forward-looking view. This is like prospective, that because this is a pen, it implies something going into the future. So making sense through narrative, a path to freedom. So this is just a short thing that leads us to our framework of freedom, which is very akin to what we're about to discuss, which we should just finish because we gotta end this stuff up. Unfortunately, I'm not streaming for a while after today. I come back on the 29th, but hopefully I come back with some goodies. Okay, so let's do this stuff. Now this is stuff that we're not going to need until part 3, but this is crucial stuff for our moral framework that we arrive at. I think Stan would enjoy Persian poetry. I don't doubt it. I would probably enjoy a lot of poetry, But what makes Persian poetry distinct? Hey, good seeing you too, Darmadam. Enjoy the holidays if you celebrate, and if you don't celebrate, celebrate something. Celebrate yourself, and yeah, have a good one. All right, the practical framework, agency, responsibility, and heuristics. For sure. Hell yeah. We now turn to the practical application. How does a specific agent navigate this landscape? The imperative of agency, internal consistency. We escape moral nihilism, not by appealing to God or reason, but by appealing to agency. To function as a coherent biological agent, one must retain consistency between one's predictive model and one's actions. So this isn't something that you have to be cognizant of. This is just how we operate. If an agent possesses a schema that predicts X is the right path, acting against X introduces voluntary prediction error, cognitive dissonance. This fragmentation undermines the agent's capacity to navigate the world. So this is slightly off how I would go about this. But it's pretty much pointing out that we have an understanding of the world, and when we're met with information, stimuli, that makes us feel a certain way, that tells us that that is wrong. And now, in part one of the document, we're only concerned with the semantic structure of the world and how that connects with the normative nature of the world. Like if something if something's incompatible with something else, if there's a conflict in your understanding, then there's some inherent understanding of what we must do in order to act as if these are incompatible. And so now we can build this up to the idea of moral understanding, where if, let's imagine you're paying attention to your conscience, and your conscience tells you that something is wrong and isn't in accordance with your own understanding of being a moral person, then perhaps you should give that some light. Okay. The responsibility to act morally is a responsibility to oneself to maintain the structural integrity of one's mind. So this isn't the way that we're going to go about it. It's not because we want to make sure we don't experience prediction error or negative emotions. It's just this is what's happening. The practical heuristic. Since we cannot know objective truth, we rely on the heuristic of our own dynamic understanding. The agent consults their current schema. Does this action align with my constructed understanding of a viable good life? So you don't have to go that far. It's just, is this moral or not? The agent accepts that alignment often requires allostatic load. So this is just random stuff that we talked about. Unfortunately, when you give feedback to Gemini, it will then highlight that feedback as like a feature of what it then creates. Doing the right thing may cause anxiety or pain, but it preserves the higher order stability of the agent's identity and long-term predictive success. That's not necessarily the case, right? You can succumb to things that are you believe to be immoral now that actually make it easier for you to feel like you're moral in the future. All right, the derived meta-ethic, facilitation. This framework implies a secondary forward-looking responsibility. So just to restate, because that didn't do a great job of it. What we're going to do in part 3 is, provided that you have an understanding of morality such that there's things that you should do and things that you shouldn't do, right? And this isn't saying that it's objectively true in the world. It's just saying that you have this understanding. Like you can reflect on it, you see it, you understand the very notion of morality, and you actually believe in it. Like you believe that, you should do things and you shouldn't do things. All that the document can say at the base level to create our entire moral framework is that you ought to figure out what those things are, what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. And then because of the very standards of your understanding of morality, that you should actually then do those. And you should, we can get into all the part 2 stuff. You should do whatever is necessary to do those things. So in part 2, we tell you how to achieve your goals. Now you've just identified moral goals, things that you should do, You have all the tools that lead you to being able to do them, and so now you have all we've supplied our entire moral framework by giving you the practical framework. And the question is, how do you then deal with like how much you should do this thing, or how you like, because the life isn't just a single moral problem. It's going to be a problem of having a bunch of different things that you think are things you should do, how you should deal with that. So then it's going to be a larger discussion about managing values, managing things that you should be doing, how to deal with this stuff over time. That's going to be part 3 as well. So our moral bud leads to a lot of discussion, but it also leads to some other types of meta ethical responsibilities. Like perhaps there's things that you can do now that not affect the immediate goals that you have, the immediate moral goals, but that will affect your ability to do moral goals going into the future. Any moral goal you come up with, what would be beneficial for you to be able to do? And one might be your ability to learn new information. Perhaps you have a moral obligation to increase your ability to, do things in the world, given that usually, learn things in the world, or whatever. We're going to have to figure out how to do this without going too far. But it's gonna kind of introduce like that type of thinking. So to clarify your document's position regarding morality, the document prescribes searching for an ethical framework and following it. Yes, and it gives you tools for figuring out how you ought to manage that. So one of the things that because what you just said is very like simple. So one of the things that we have to mention, one of the deepest parts of the part 3 in terms of the moral stuff that we're gonna have to mention is, it is possible for you to follow what you think to be moral, and based on the social environment that you're around, your conscience can be calibrated to a point where you end up feeling like things that are things that feel moral in the moment are things that you would have previously found very much immoral. So I always bring up this example as like the ultimate example, the book of Ordinary Men, how ordinary men ended up carrying out the Holocaust. And it points out how it's not like these men were like evil from the get-go. It was an incremental change where you could say their conscience was recalibrated over a long period of time, relatively speaking, given that they were in social groups where they saw other people doing it, so they thought it was fine. And a lot of the time, there was cognitive dissonance, but that cognitive dissonance goes away once you just let go of it. So at some point, you can't just follow what you believe to be moral. There needs to be some other mechanism in there that allows you to over time, to ensure that you're not going in a direction that you wouldn't otherwise like to go. Now, the question is, the difficulty here is like, how do you know that where you were wasn't the immoral? And so there's almost a necessity to also ground your moral framework in some tangible heuristic, which we're gonna have to come up with. You need something that allows you to point in a direction that isn't just what you believe to be true or moral in the moment. So there's going to be a lot to discuss in our moral framework, but it's going to be that bottom level. Like it's going to have to be fundamental. We can't go up into you ought to. I say this all the time. We can't get to the point where we say you ought not kill, or you ought to hold the door open for someone, or you ought to pay your taxes. Like we can't get there. We're not allowed to. That's too high level. But we can talk about these things at a very low abstract level. All right, we must live ethics. Amen. Well, actually, so the only reason that we're going to talk about ethics in part 3 of this document, because the part 3 of this document doesn't really care whether you're moral, like most directly. The only reason we talk about ethics is because, and we're going to have to build the case for this. I'm going to have to actually learn this. but this is my intuition. Feeling that you are doing something moral and big in that sense affects your well-being. And that's what we're really looking for in part 3. We're looking for, how do you feel like your life is meaningful? And it seems like morality is a huge part of that. That's the only reason we're going to do that. So we must live ethics. It's not that we must live ethics. It's that if you want to live a meaningful life, then perhaps you should live ethics. That's going to be it. And that's a prescription that isn't like a moral prescription. It's a prescription based on the goal that you have. Just like how, if you want to get to the top of the steps, you should walk up the steps. Something like that. Moral obligation is a slippery slope, right? It's tricky. That's why we have to stay only where we're allowed to stay. We're starting with we're starting with rock bottom, and we're only going to build as far as we can build. So why do you think some people believe in things that are said to be false or at best dubious? And why do you think someone would still choose to believe something they know or feel even slightly is false? Okay. I think that these things are complicated, and there's probably a bunch of reasons. Why do you feel like some people would believe in things that are said to be false or at best dubious? Well, one of the reasons could be that they don't think that it's false, or they don't think that it's dubious. It could be that they actually don't care as much about what they're saying or what they're indicating in this sense, because there's something that's more true than that. Like there's something that's more morally prioritized than that. Whether that's their social, what they're doing socially, what they're implying by saying that thing to be false. Or I'm sorry, you're saying believed things that people believe in. So what they, chances everyone believes in the truth at this fundamental level that I just said. So even though they might have an inclination that something is false in some sense, they're able to rationalize getting to the why it would be true in some other sense. So this goes back to what we've been talking the past few days, what Jonathan Haidt said, where we feel our moral truth first, we feel our rational truth first, and then we rationalize it afterwards. We come up with the reasons why afterwards. We're post hoc trying to make sense of why we felt that way. And that often leads people to behave in a way that you might think is bad faith, when they're really just trying to operate towards the truth that they're feeling. Now, also, what's going on here, and to answer your second question, is, and why do you think someone would still choose to believe in something they know or feel even slightly is false? And the answer is always going to be because it would be very uncomfortable for them to not do that, or they don't even have it. They don't even have the courage or mechanism to abide by what they're seeing is maybe true. Is maybe false. So like social dynamics can make you feel comfortable could make you not deal with the possibility of something being false. Like social dynamics can make you feel like this is a better path because this is actually leading to alleviating the social discomfort that I'm feeling in this moment. And that's what I think affects a lot of people. Now, once you get there, though, you become where you actually you believe the thing is false or true. You get to a point where you have actually internalized the feeling, and you didn't respond when you should have. So this idea of paying attention to when your brain tells you something is actually a skill that you have to build. First is a skill in mindfulness of paying attention to the thing, and then it's also a skill in, once you notice that you could possibly be wrong, it's a skill of actually doing it. Because if you let that go too many times, then you're not gonna. It's either it won't even manifest for you, or you won't have the will to do it. And this is one of those. Scenarios where willpower isn't what's actually getting you to do it over time. You're making it such that the willpower necessary is lessened. So Um, as I should have said, it's not willpower alone. It's you doing something now that affects your willpower the next time that you deal with it and whatnot. I don't think you choose to believe something false, right? And in a lot of these cases, it's not completely conscious. It's a lot of times unconscious. This is false, or I feel that is false, but I'm going to choose to believe it anyway. Yeah, so I don't think that people often have like that type of full thought in their head, and they defend it absolutely. I think a lot of times this thing happens like at a at an unconscious level to some extent. Like even if you were to tell someone and you were to give them the reasons why something is false, that's not what as we've talked about in the past, that isn't the type of experience that they require in order to get them to believing that is false. Like that we like to think that reasons are what leads you from something that's true to something that's false, but what's really necessary is for them to be open to the experience of getting there. And if they are not open for that and they find it very uncomfortable, they won't be able to do that. I don't take it that's their belief, though. I take that to be their statements. Yeah, it's something like that. Like their belief, their true belief, like the belief that they're actually acting out, that they're feeling, that they're allowing their own drives to take them. Because once again, our view in this document is one where we only really like kind of get a hold of our life when we take some sort of reflective hold, and even that can be trained, right? We're finding out that mindfulness is something that is, mindfulness is something that allows us to even get a better hold of ourselves when we be mindful in the moment. Otherwise, either your mindfulness can't combat against the thoughts that are trying to jump in your head, as you find will be the case when you try mindfulness meditation. It's very difficult to keep that control. But when people are not even reflecting in the moment on like specifically on their ability to take control of this moment, then they're just subject to being pushed all over the place by their internal drives. So yeah, if someone is like, imagine they're distracted with the emotional feelings that are happening in this moment, as they are heavily biased towards a certain direction, and for them that direction is true in some visceral sense. And a lot of times something that's very intuitive is like sometimes someone gives you a really good argument as to why something is the case, and you don't have a counter argument right now, but somehow in some intuition that you've heard a counter argument that actually combats that. So you're in this weird position where you don't know why you feel like you can't buy into what they just said. You have this other thing looming. Now, the other case is like someone's mentioned something, and that you have a I guess this is the same thing. That you wish you could be able to say all the reasons why what they said is not right, and you're trying to. You're trying to give reasons. You're trying to make sense of this intuition that you have. But what they gave you was not an effective enough experience for you to have changed that intuition. Your intuition is still telling you, hey, there's something that this person is missing out of the equation that perhaps you can give them. And then you post hoc try to rationalize your thoughts, and perhaps you somewhat get a sense, or like you try to touch on that intuition, but chances are you don't touch on that intuition perfectly, especially in the heat of the moment. This is what happens all the time. So yeah, I think we have to go into this whole what's happening when people are debating and talking about these things. And I don't think it's just two people are giving back and forth reasons, and if only you had enough reasons, you would get to the right answer, and your mind would be changed. Okay. There's also this thing where, for example, part of a specific group will try to frame everything their group does in a manner that'll be advantageous to them or seem good in a colloquial sense, right? Because they're right now operating under this idea that their group is good, and to get information, the possibility that their group has done something that's not good is difficult, and they could either be courageous and accept that and consider how that might be the case, or they are not courageous and consider how that might be the case by making some rationalization for it, by making it not actually indicative of the group being bad in a sense, but it's actually that the group's good because of this other reason that negates what you just said. So like all this stuff is always at play. Tribalism, yeah. Out of curiosity, if the document prescribes searching for a moral system and following it, what methods does it prescribe for avoiding bad moral systems? Perfect. I don't know. Well, we have to figure. I mean, you have to base. I think it's the same thing that I just said. You have to base it in something that's tangible. So perhaps the document can actually say, hey, you actually have a moral responsibility to also look for alternative views, alternative moral views. You have to go and learn different cultures. You have to try to understand why they think the things that they think. Like you have a moral, not because you have to become what they are, but by putting in the effort to being open that you can understand something that you don't currently know, that at least primes you to be able to change your understanding of what is moral in a way that might deter, what you're saying are like bad moral systems. Right. The issue is that there is no such thing as a good moral system or a bad moral system inherently. So you have to have some sort of tangible gauge as to how you can go about that. And it's got to involve learning. That's I don't think there's any way against it. You have to learn new information. Because even something like well-being is something that's kind of culturally contingent. You know, you could say that, like, obviously, suffering is like a universal. But yeah, for some people, that might not, it might be the case that society wants something else. Like, regardless of how much suffering it takes for humans to strive, we want humans to persist. So that's actually a slightly different moral than the lack of suffering. Because you could say that if we really just wanted the lack of suffering, then why don't we just get rid of everyone, right? That's the terrible position that comes from that. And then the question is, how much suffering do we want based on how much living and positive well-being do we want? So these are all these like really ambiguous moral values that we have to figure out how much of each do we want, and how does this play out practically? How have other people done this? How do other people say to do it? You have to go out into the world. You got to learn. As Jordan Peterson says, you have to go out and slay the dragon. So there is information that you do not know everywhere you look, in other religions, in other spiritualities, in other countries, in other cultures. You have to go out and you have to slay those dragons, in the sense that you have to take the chaos that is currently there. And it's uncomfortable to go and learn and do this type of thing, because it might make you feel like you're doing something that's wrong. And you have to slay the dragon in the sense of you got to put it into boxes. You have to make order out of it. You got to figure out, you got to make sense of why they would be doing that. And so this is where we end up in our moral framework. And I think I don't know what kind of case we're going to make in this way, but I think this is the direction towards maybe guiding yourself. Now the question is, how much should you do that? That's an issue. Like, yeah, this is it's very difficult to navigate the world. This is why people have these like existential questions. There's no like right answer. So it's always going to be a constant practice of figuring out how much you should be doing of each of these things that I've been saying. And you have to leverage yourself, your own conscience, as some sort of gauge, and then you have to leverage, in some sense, what the document's saying as a gauge of like, hey, like perhaps, You should be doing this thing to make sure that you're not falling into some bad moral system. One of the things that the document's going to say you should do is be cognizant of the social groups that you're in, the media that you're taking in. What is your information diet? That's all going to affect where you end up in terms of your moral understanding. So we're gonna have to talk about all this stuff. There's a lot of stuff to talk about in part 3 as well. I haven't even come close to outlining it, but we'll get there, maybe in 2027. Okay, thanks. It's always very strange though, because you can't help but ask why. It's why I believe debates aren't really effective. I honestly do think taking an atheist to the Sistine Chapel would do more to convince them that God exists than any argument. I agree. I think what would be a really effective exercise is figuring out what is actually the optimal way to behave in a debate if you're actually looking to change their mind or change viewers' minds. And that's something that we should do on this channel, because I'm going to be on this screen. Like, I'm going to be inherently an influencer, right? So I got to figure out what would be the optimal way to get people to do these things for their own sake. In many of these cases, I'm trying to sell self-help stuff, so I need to be effective at selling the things that I think will actually help people out. And it's going to be tricky, because a lot of the stuff that lays foundation to our self-help stuff is the difficult philosophical stuff that will conflict with other people's views. So that's why we probably don't want to always just jump down into the philosophical. Granted, I don't mind doing that now, because we have got this relatively small viewership, but at some point I have to be very mindful of how much we should be in the weeds and how much we should be just talking about the self-help stuff, which is really kind of what our channel's trying to do. So I'm very much a believer in most of stuff being value-based at the bottom. So for example, the cognitive dissonance on saying something you don't believe would in my best guess probably be due to some value overriding the value of evaluating your true beliefs and saying the truth, etc. Maybe the value of something infallible, etc. Sorry, big topic, small text box. Hey, no, good point. So that's kind of one of the things that we want to also be paying attention to in our own life. And that's actually why part 2 starts out with a discussion of our automated behavior. Like, what do we have? What is driving us? What are these underlying values that maybe we haven't even accepted, or maybe we don't even like, right? Addiction's like the obvious example. It's like there's something where we wish we weren't doing it, and we keep doing it though. So in the case of social dynamics, being cognizant that your social dynamics are going to affect what you feel, what you believe. So having that ability to pay attention to that is a huge tool. And that's we're going to have to discuss a lot of automated behavior here. This is where we talk about biases. We're going to have to talk about cognitive biases, social dynamics, dealing with trauma, decoy effects, zero price effect, all these things that are affecting our experience of behavior in the moment. All right, so to clarify, the way your document prescribes avoiding bad moral systems is by prescribing learning about multiple moral systems. To clarify, my document does not know what good and bad moral systems are. That's the point. So given the fact that you don't know what is a good and a bad moral system, the only thing that can give you a better direction towards what might be good and what might be bad is learning, like figuring out. Because imagine that at every moment you've already learned stuff. You're at a certain state. How do you know what you currently know what you currently understand is good or bad, like in that direction. You're always at a point where you have to learn more. It's a constant for the rest of your life. You have to be open to new information that can tell you whether or not what you believe is actually right. That goes back to what we just said about objective truth. We know that we can be wrong. There's many times where I think something's right and it turns out being wrong. That's the same with moral understandings. Just, you can never assume that you've arrived at the end. That's the whole point about assaulting this notion that just because we feel like something is certain, therefore it must be certain, So it prescribes learning at the most fundamental sense, right? It's not that you have to read these certain books. It doesn't mean you have to learn in a certain way. That's up to you to figure out what you feel like would be the most effective way to learn. But the one thing that we need to be to make the reader cognizant of is that is the possibility that you aren't doing enough that will lead you out of the bad. So as long as you feel like you're doing what's right in the moment, then you're chilling. But you have to, you can't just let that go. You have to recurrently reflect upon whether or not you're doing what is right. And this leads, this is a very huge responsibility. Like, this is one of the reasons why Jordan Peterson always says, when you just ask your brain what you should be doing, it's going to be uncomfortable. And imagine that you can't just do that once. You have to do that, and you have to do that again, and you have to do that again. And the goal is to actually change your brain such that it's easier to do that. That's like one of the things that is involved in the fact that this is a practice. This is a skill to be gained. It's a skill of freedom. Now, first in the part one, it's a skill of freedom in the non-moral sense, but you can build the skill of navigating of ambiguous morality in the world. Do you believe the notion of value pluralism, to my understanding, associated with philosopher, is a viable moral system in your view? So, what I just said is perhaps, it's the most fundamental moral system that I can think of. But that doesn't mean that some deontology or utilitarian view isn't also like a viable moral framework. All right, I gotta get off after this though. I don't need to put this in quotes. I gotta put the work in to actually get clips out of these streams. I feel like there was a lot of clippable material in the last few days. A lot of fun chats. A lot of fun convos. Sounds like moral particularism might fit too, but I haven't read that much. Okay. We did not actually look at moral particularism yesterday when we did our taxonomy. All right, I don't know which one's going to be better here. I'm just going to pick the left one. The central topic in the political philosophy of Berlin, it is the claim that human values are objective and real, but they are also irreducibly many. They frequently conflict, and most importantly, they are incommensurable. This means there is no single currency of measuring rod that can translate all human values into a single system to tell us which one is correct. Incommensurability cannot be measured the same. He argued that genuine human values are distinct entities. You cannot have total liberty and total equality at the same time. So this is slightly different, but maybe there's like a similar analogy to be made. The idea that they're irreducibly many is also like once again, the philosophy that's underlying all of what I talk about is some sort of linguistic pragmatism. So I'm not trying to assert that anything is anything, right? That human values are objective and real, um, in some like metaphysical sense. Like obviously, I have to make assertions about ways that we can go about Microglia and Rick and Morty. Nice ways that we can go about thinking about things. Like that is like technically a fact. But yeah, I'm trying to point out ways that we can think about things. So I just don't want to be too assertive. But then I also don't want to be assertive about like the irreducibly of these concepts. Like when we talk about concepts in the document, they are not clear cut. I mean, we say they're determinate in the sense that they're determined by the relations to other concepts, but we also point out that first of all, we can never like take hold of these concepts. Like we can only imagine what they are. We can only think about what they are. We can only put them into words. You know, when I think about what makes a pen, I can only try to iterate through all the facts I know about a pen. What it possibly could be, where it possibly could be. So concepts are much more like elusive and free floating in our view. And so the idea of them being reducible at all is just unintelligible. Oh my gosh, I just freaked myself out as my my blackout curtain fell. That's a recurring thing on this stream now, me getting jump scared by my blackout curtain. So I also don't want to make claims such as like that there are like these human values are distinct entities. Like all these human values are ambiguous in some sense, but they're pragmatically similar for people in similar cultures. So I don't know, perhaps like the essence of what he's trying to get at though is similar. Choice becomes tragic. If you choose to prioritize justice, you have to sacrifice. Okay, so in this case, we have a similarity. Like there is a difficulty of figuring out what is the right one to follow. And so perhaps pluralism is not relativism. So yeah, I guess you could imagine what I've been saying through some sort of pluralism, that we can imagine, each person can imagine different values that they would want to maximize or want to go towards. One example of this is like, you can imagine that we can follow a sort of utilitarianism and deontology at the same time. Utilitarianism is often very difficult to apply in practice because events are very complex. You don't actually know what's going to maximize what you're trying to maximize. So you come up with these like rule. So this is rule utilitarianism, which ends up being some sort of deontology in general, where you just do the thing. Like when you're dealing with something in a landscape that's too complex, you deal with the rule that you understand to lead to the greater outcome. So irreducibility is basically moral particularism. In other words, morality isn't reducible to principles. Yeah, so I think I shy away from making a case about reducibility or irreducibility. It's more so that you're just kind of dealing with your conceptual understanding. There's ways you can access it by just reflecting on what you believe. You can prompt it in different ways. Obviously, once again, we're leveraging our conceptual understanding to make sense of our conceptual understanding. That's like how that's how we're making sense of this whole thing. At the base, all we're getting though is activations in the brain that are giving us emotions mixed with these like linguistic readings with like linguistic relations to other things. Like there's a lot of parts of our brain that's coloring our conscious experience in the moment. If you choose to, okay, so pluralism is not relativism. Common misconception is that is the same as moral relativism. Freedom is an objective human goods. So yeah, he's still believing in these objective things that are irreducible, and we can't operate as if this isn't telling the whole story. I think our document's going to tell a little bit more to the story than this. Like what is freedom, right? And we talk about the notion that a concept like freedom is experienced differently for each person. Each person has a different understanding of what freedom means and what it implies. And we have a pragmatically similar understanding, such that I can say freedom and you kind of get what I'm saying. When we can talk about freedom in a sentence, and you can identify this word. So that there's a human horizon, a limit to what counts as a value. Yeah, so this, now we're just bringing up arbitrary rules, arbitrary culturally contingent rules, and so I'm not going to deal with this. The link to liberalism used value pluralism to justify liberalism and negative liberty. So yeah, this is going to be where we fall short, or where we fall out as well, where we can't abide by what's going on here. If there's no correct way to live, and if humans' values inevitably clash, then the best political system is one that acknowledges that conflict is unavoidable. So yeah, this is a good philosophy, but asserting that this should be a political system is like going way too far. This is a good way to understand the world, but the idea that just because we can understand, we can find utility in understanding the world in this way, doesn't mean that it's necessarily a good political system. Maintains a private sphere where individuals are free to make their own difficult choices between conflicting values. Yeah. Like, our document maybe suggests something about free speech, but it can't actually make the case. Like, it's not responsible for making that case. It's not in the scope of the document to actually say, like, our political system should be a certain way. All right, on this we should bounce. I was a little let down by this academic telling of what we came up with, so maybe I'll push it further. But we'll see. I think I gotta call it here. Actually, you know what? Let's figure out what's going on with this. All right. Yikes. All right. Yikes. It starts with the yikes. Sounds like a setup for a D's Nuts joke, right? Yeah, no. I mean, there's something. Something like inappropriate sounding of all, like, even just glial cells. Like, I don't know what's going. This is all stuff that Rick and Morty made up. Very nice. Astrocytes, the synaptic managers. All right, astrocytes are star-shaped glial cells that envelop synapses. Research since 2007 has elucidated their role in gliotransmission. Astrocytes express receptors of neurotransmitters. When they detect synaptic activity, they can release their own chemical signals to modulate the excitability. They're eating those synapses up. All right, to clarify, your document's position can only be that you have a moral responsibility to learn about moral systems and choose them, but it can't make any more prescriptions than that. I would say, to clarify, that the document, the root of the document's moral position is that if you have an understanding of morality such that you should do some things and you should not do some things, then you have a moral responsibility, according to your very understanding, to do those. To figure out what those things are that you should be doing and shouldn't be doing, and then to do them. And then the document can start considering ways that will, help you out in that endeavor. And so really the document's position is that one route, right? But then we derive a bunch of, like, more meta-ethical things from that one initial thing. So, and we're making arguments based on the stuff that we talk about. So it's this example that you gave, the learning example, is because we know that our understanding is dynamic and that we understand the fact that we might not know what is right in the moment. Like, there's always this possibility that what we know is not right. And that's what initiates this possibility that perhaps we should do that. It's not saying that you have a moral responsibility to learn necessarily, or at least I don't. Maybe it is, but it's suggesting that perhaps you have a responsibility to figure out if what you're doing is actually moral or not. That's actually kind of inherent in that first thing that I said. You have a responsibility to figure out what is moral and what's not moral, and that doesn't go away. That's not a one-time thing. That's a constant thing. So yeah, so it's all part of that initial bud, as I said. Can the document prescribe people learn about morality even if they don't believe in it? No, that's the thing. If you don't believe in morality, like if you're not down with morality at all, you don't subscribe to morality, then there's nothing that we can even give you in that sense. We can try to point out that people who do follow some sort of morality do gain a positive effect on their well-being. But yeah, that's seemingly loops. Yeah, there are loops about our document. Like there are. The thing that makes the document special is that it recognizes the paradox of itself and it takes responsibility for it. So, yeah, I'm not sure which loops you were referring to, but there's multiple cases where the document actually like kind of leads to a loop. Like, why should you have a moral framework? Oh, yeah. So once again, part 3 is only concerned with your well-being. It says like, hey, if you want your well-being to be this way, then these are things that you can do. You can consider. Part 2 is if you want to achieve any goal, these are things you can do. It's not things you should do. But it's like in some sense, there's a maybe should, just in the case of like, if you want to be able to pass this test, then you should learn the material. Something like that. Like it's possibly a way you can go about this, right? So yeah, like a functional should. So this is where it's like, if you would like to have well-being, if you want to make your life feel meaningful, then perhaps you should take up some sort of morality and follow it. Because, and we need science here. Like we can't just say that. We need to actually show the proof that morality, that people who feel like their lives are moral, or that they're doing something that's morally big or, you know, whatever, above themselves or whatever, that leads them to feel more positive emotions in their life, or they feel like their life is meaningful. Like that's all we really care about in part 3. So if you don't if you don't subscribe to if you don't subscribe to morality in general, then we have nothing to give you there. You know, skip ahead to post morality stuff. You know, we don't care. You know, I mean, we'll tell you, hey, like morality's gonna help you out here, but if you don't believe us, then, you know, just like if you don't believe us when we tell you that this is how you can build habits and make things easier for yourself. If you don't believe in habits, then you know that you lost a tool that we're providing you. Reason I reference Berlin is because my understanding of his notion of value pluralism seems to support Enlightenment values and liberalism, and to my understanding, you're personally sympathetic to those values. Right, but I'm not the document. You know, I know this is like really weird for me to say, but I have to act as if the document is some sort of like separate entity that has its own scope. You know, I've got, you know, responsibilities that I think are morally right, and I can't let that seep into the document. The document's for everyone. The document's not just me. So I can't be selfish about putting things that I care about in the document. I don't know if that's the right terminology. A function. Okay, right. But I think that's going to help us out, because everyone's really skeptical of when, you know, people are just making their philosophy based on their political views and whatnot, you know. All right, I got to get out of here. I got to take this opportunity, this dead air. I gotta leave while I still can. Thank you all for good discussions. and straight chilling. And yeah, enjoy the holidays. Similar to what I said to Darmadam. Even if you don't celebrate a holiday, find something to celebrate. Just for fun. You know, buy some ice cream, watch a movie, have a good time. And yeah, see you all in like a week and a half. Have a good one. See you later.